means that your microphone is on and the camera will automatically pan towards you. If you have a different coloured light, just wait. It means another microphone is turned on, and when it's turned off, yours will then activate. Please speak directly into the top of the microphone and avoid turning your head away when speaking, which I know is really difficult when you're trying to address someone next to you or behind you. But if you can do your best to always talk towards myself and Ray, then there's a good chance the microphone will pick you up. I will remind everyone that non-committee members will be given the opportunity to speak before the committee debate on every item, and that I ask everyone to kind of introduce themselves the first time they stand up and speak. You don't have to do it every single time. And also today we are trying a bit of a change in technology. As we know previously, I've had major issues myself in hearing what anybody says when they're online. So we found out today there has been some adjustments in the volumes and the way of changing the sound from online to here, and we are going to attempt it with one particular member externally, and if it works, we can then look at changing it so external members appearing online can interact with this meeting. But if it doesn't work, we will go back and continue the way we are. But we're always looking at trying to make it more accessible for everybody. I would like to start by apologising that there was a delay for this meeting, as we're all aware. It wasn't out of choice, but out of necessity. And I'm now going to call in Jonathan Mayer to speak briefly on it.
Good morning, members. Jonathan Mayer, Director of Legal and Democratic. And I'd just like to take a moment to apologise that the meeting that was originally scheduled for 6th of March has been moved to today. And to thank you, Chairman, and to thank members for accommodating that change. The dates of your meetings, they're timetabled far in advance so that as members you can include them in your busy diaries and so that we as officers can prepare for the meetings. And I'm sorry that we didn't have papers ready for the meeting on 6th of March, and we'll do our best to avoid this happening in future and needing to move things at short notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciated. And I think we understand these things happen. And we can thank you for making sure that rather than cancelling it, it was just moved and still manages to be done in time. We're going to now move to item 1, apologies. Actually, I should probably start by saying, good morning, I'm Nocturin Lacey Clark of the Blandford Forum Ward and the chairman of the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. So now I've done the bit I've asked you all to do. Item 1, apologies. We have apologies from Councillors Rory Major, Alex Brenton and David Took. Are there any others we need to be aware of? No, no one's shouting. Fantastic. Item 2, minutes. Are we happy to confirm and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of January 2025? Anybody have any amendments or issues with them? No, can we all assent that we're signing them? Everyone's happy to assent? Assent, absolutely. Then we will go to item 3, declarations of interest. So this is if any members have declarations they need to make in terms of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests. None that need to be added? No, they're already disclosed. Fantastic. Item 4, public participation, where we have actually received a question from Becky Brookman from Unison. And it's really good to have a question from the member of the public. And I'd like to remind any public listening and any councillors, you are welcome to put questions in, not just at full council and cabinet, but also at all of the scrutiny and overview meetings, and we do encourage it. And so, Becky, I'll now hand over to you. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you. Thanks, Anthony. So as a union representing the workforce, we have several concerns regarding the Our Future Council 2024 transformation programme outlined in the report. So number 1, a lack of engagement and communication. So the report highlights the rapid scaling of the transformation programme and the engagement of external expertise to achieve savings. However, there is no mention of meaningful engagement with the union or the workforce to gather input and address concerns. This lack of involvement isn't shown as a lesson learned from the failures of 2024. 2, unrealistic savings targets. The initial savings target of 8.6 million for 2024-25 was not met, and the new target for 2025-26 is set at 10 million. The report acknowledges the high-risk nature of these targets and the challenges faced in achieving them. The transformation programme is heavily focused on achieving financial savings with less emphasis on the well-being and development of employees. This approach can lead to disengaged workforce and higher turnover rates. And 3, the impact of organisational changes. The report mentions significant organisational changes, including the change of political leadership and the introduction of a whole council transformation programme. These changes can create uncertainty and instability within the workforce, affecting morale and productivity. The change of the chief executive may also impact the ability to deliver these savings. 4, resource constraints. The report indicates that additional capacity was required to complete the whole council discovery phase, leading to the engagement of external consultants. This raises concerns about the capacity of the internal resources and the potential for the over-reliance on external support, which may not be sustainable in the long term. There is a potential to upskill our workforce using apprenticeships if we know what skills are needed. Given these concerns, we urge the Council to engage more effectively with the Union and the workforce to ensure that transformation objectives are met in a manner that supports both organisational goals and employee well-being. So our question is, the Council have been very clear in discussions with Unison that the longer our Future Council project takes, the longer the OFC savings take, the more jobs that will need to be cut. How many additional jobs will be lost due to the Council's failure to deliver any savings from OFC in 2024?
Becky, thank you very much. I believe the response is going to be from Aidan Dunn.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Aidan Dunn. I'm Executive Director for Corporate Development, which means I'm the Council's Chief Finance Officer as well as the Executive responsible for council-wide transformation. So first of all, Becky, thank you ever so much for your question and thank you for representing your members so clearly. I'm going to a few comments on the general themes before responding to the specific question. So in terms of engagement, we as a programme team feel that we are making regular efforts for engagement. Since November 23, we've met with Unison on 11 separate occasions, typically an hour each, dedicated to our Future Council. So that's my colleague Lisa, who's the director, Nina, who's programme manager, and Chris Matthews, our head of HR. And more recently, those meetings have been supplemented with the attendance of Jonathan Mayer. So this is dedicated meetings for our Future Council, in addition to the union engagement meetings that we have generally. So I feel as though we're making good and proportionate efforts there. Secondly, you mentioned about turnover and concerns around anxiety leading to turnover. Our assessment is that turnover has not been impacted yet. We've developed a people and change strategy alongside the refresh of our organisational values, and this is really helping support the organisation. Financial resilience is just one of the outcomes for our Future Council. It's equally about, if not more, about improving the customer experience. So that's really important. You mentioned the change of chief executive. We're fortunate to have Sam Crowe as our interim chief executive. He's published his priorities, including one of which is providing a steady hand over the Our Future Council transformation programme. That's one of his priorities. And during this time of change, I think that is a powerful message and brings stability. And then finally, you raised concerns about skills and capacity required to support the programme. I think we have well documented the skills and capacity where we have got the skills we need, but also where we haven't got the skills we need. And this was detailed in the business case to January. So a recognition that we do need to bring skills in where necessary. Regarding your specific question, will the delays to the programme or the not delivering 8.6 million this current financial year, will that make the situation worse next financial year? The answer is no, because the planned reduction of 386 full-time equivalent posts is planned for next financial year and the year after. That's outlined in the business case that was approved in January. By not delivering this financial year, as we're about to explore as a committee, that has been underwritten by reserves. So delays this year will not impact on next year, but any delays during the course of next year and the year after, that will impact. And that's a really crucial message. So once again, thank you for your continued challenge, support and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan. A full and valid response. Move to item 5, questions from councillors. We have not received any. Any councillors listening online, thank you so much. Please do consider putting questions in for the next one. Item 6, our future council 2024. I think we're all kind of looking forward to digging into this one and to find out what happened. And I believe Aidan's going to actually introduce the paper, so I'll hand over to Aidan now. Thank
you very much. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to present this paper. I think it's a really important topic for the committee to study, and not least, as we've set out in the opening section of the paper, if we're not on course to deliver the savings this financial year, what confidence does it give us for next year and the year after? So I think the paper itself takes us through that journey, and I'm hoping will give you assurance and reassurance that you're looking for, but let's see how the conversation goes. I think I'd also like to thank the way that we were given very clear 4 key lines of inquiry by the committee that's really helped frame the response that we've prepared. So just a quick headline of the key messages in the report. In 2024, an ambitious savings target of 8.6 million was set for our future council programme. Due to various challenges, including organisational changes and the need for a more comprehensive transformation programme, these savings are not on track to be fully realised this financial year. And we recognise that very early on in this financial year, and so have pivoted the programme to move it from a single area transformation programme into a council-wide transformation programme. And that way we're able to, we believe, identify a much more significant area of savings. So the next year's budget, we've set a savings target of £10 million, and this report provides a detailed review of what we've done this year, the lessons we've learnt, and key areas for you to explore. I think the final section of the report looks at the barriers we've faced and how we've overcome them. And I think the key findings are, in terms of the report, the £8.6 million target was a top-down approach to close a budget gap. And this target was originally 12 million, it was scaled back to 8.6 million. So at the start of the programme, we've been trying to develop a programme to deliver that 8.6 million, as opposed to the other way around, of coming forward with an 8.6 million pound plan. There are significant challenges that we've faced during the programme, and those also are contextual. We've had significant turnover of senior leadership within the council in terms of executive directors. We've had a change of administration, and we've also a change from that single area transformation to a council-wide transformation. So all of those aspects take time to bed in and to respond to, and that has caused delays to some extent. One of the areas you've asked to explore is what transformation have we achieved this financial year, and the report details some really significant areas which my colleagues will be happy to talk through if required later on. And then we've concluded in the report with the various barriers and how we've overcome. And I would like to think we've described how the circumstances have changed. We're much more detailed in our preparation. The papers that went to Cabinet in January with the evidence behind it should give much more reassurance that we'll be able to deliver during next financial year, much more so than we have this financial year. So I'll conclude my introduction at that point and look forward to a spirited conversation, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan. Now, generally, this is when I would ask the Cabinet member who'd like to speak. Ben, I know that the plan on this was absolutely from kind of pre your time. Did you want to speak at this point, or do you want to come in later when you feel you can add something? Fantastic, excellent. Thank you very much. Because I am aware we are discussing a plan that was created, in theory, by a different administration and then carried out with different portfolio holders. And so we're really looking at the nitty-gritty of what happened behind the scenes, I think. So should I open it up straight away? Who would like to kick us off? I'm sure we're all raring to go. I do ask for non-members first. So any non-member? Andrew Parry, please come in.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Andrew Parry, West Parley Ward, and leader of the Conservative Group. You referenced, of course, the change of administration at County Hall. But we are well aware, or we are now well aware, that senior officers were working with the now Liberal Democrat administration some 6 months prior to that election to establish what their priorities would be. And if their priorities were not to include saving 8.6 million, why did officers persist in the notion that it would remain a priority during the financial year? Why were we not advised at an earlier date that this simply was never going to happen?
Is that to Aidan, I'm guessing?
Thank you. So let me, how to frame that? I think the paper sets out the timeline and the what has happened over the last 18 months or so. And the crucial element is that so this is in a context of local government finance has been extraordinarily strained, and we needed to find opportunities for efficiency. And what we recognised very early on was that the plans that we had for improving customer contact weren't going to be sufficient. So we moved into a much broader frame of looking at other ways of trying to achieve the 8.6 million. So I reference here some work that officers did thinking the unthinkable, these 57 different ideas of how funding could be saved, how costs could be reduced and funding could be saved. And then as we approach that May timeline with a change of administration, we were very clear that those 57 ideas weren't going to be able to close the financial gap either. So let me just say that again. So we'd originally thought that customer services alone would be able to close that gap. It wasn't. We looked across the council to think the unthinkable and recognised that that work wasn't going to achieve the savings. And then we moved on to this council-wide transformation programme and brought in our partners through PwC to help us with that. I think one of the really crucial, so the point I'm trying to make is we've been focused on achieving the 8.6 million. We've been exploring different ways of doing it. We've got to a point now where that 8.6 has grown to 10, but we're much more confident of delivering. Throughout, it's been underpinned by a theme of transformation as opposed to simple cut and redundancy. And so we've been taking a very measured approach that not all local authorities around the country, or indeed either side of us, have been able to do. So I'm hoping. So that's the story described in the paper. That's what happened, and I think that's my best response to you. Back to you, Chair.
If I may ask a supplementary on that. Given that there was an appetite from the incoming administration to spend some £500,000 with PricewaterhouseCoopers, but there wasn't an appetite to see through £8.6 million of savings, were the officers given the priority to go out and spend rather than to save?
Thank you. Absolutely not. So as Chief Finance Officer of the Council, we were very clear of the incoming administration of the financial challenges the organisation was facing, significant demand pressures, as well as this £8.6 million budget gap in terms that we were developing the plans for. And we've been reporting that publicly throughout the process. The funding for PwC came from a grant from central government to support transformation in local government. So the message that we received as officers from an incoming administration was live within your means, but a recognition of a similar message that we'd had from the previous administration, that invest to save is an important aspect of achieving savings, and we were fortunate that the investment came from external government funding. So we weren't told to go away and spend. We were told to live within our means, but we did it on an invest to save basis with external funding.
Councillor Gary Suttle.
There you go. How's that? Councillor Gary Suttle, Swanage. I think what we have to recognise is that there is a fundamental issue when you have a change of administration. Now, if this was in the commercial world, what you would do is that if there was a complete change of directors of a major company, you would have a transitional period. And those coming in would talk to those going out, and you would discuss what their plans were and how you were going to change. When you have a political change, you just have a complete line drawn. There is no movement between the two. The officers are often left in a limbo because they're not quite certain should they be continuing with what they left or should they be continuing with what's coming. But in the case of our future council, I've often heard, you had no plan. I hear that on a regular basis, but I don't believe that the Section 151 officer would have signed off if he felt there was no plan. And indeed, there was a plan. So if you go back to February 24, when we met as a senior leadership team and the then cabinet, we were authorising significant funding to go towards what we would be looking at, which was the processes within various directorates. But we would also be looking at the significant issue in this council of the lack of IT and the lack of central database. And that is what we would have been pursuing had we continued on. But of course, what in reality happens when you have a change of political administration is there is a delay, and those coming in don't really know what those going out intended. And there was no discussions about that whatsoever. I firmly believe that had we continued on, we would have made some of those savings. But the incoming administration chose to do something different. And of course, they never asked us what our plan was. So that's why we sit here today with no savings whatsoever out of our intended, which was originally, as Aidan said, over 12 million, cut back due to government funding that came in at the end of the year, back to 8. And I'll reiterate that no one would have signed off on an £8.6 million plan that didn't exist. Thank you.
So just before I call in, just to clarify, so we are saying, I saw Aidan nodding, there was a plan, that there was a plan there to do it. Because I know that's been a big cause of disruption within the chamber, and it'd be nice to have that kind of nailed out as a whole, as part of this work going forward. Aidan, do you want to respond?
Thank you. So the question of whether there is a plan. Before I go into that, can I just clarify the role of officers? The role of officers in this council is to support all members, regardless of political party. So whilst Councillor Parry says we were briefing the Liberal Dems beforehand, there's nothing untoward about that. This is our job as officers, is to brief all members at all points throughout time. So is there a simple answer to was there a plan or not? So as Chief Finance Officer, I proposed or advocated a budget that was approved by the council that did have £8.6 million savings target from our future council. And we had a plan to develop a plan. So it's a bit of a subtlety. So as Councillor Suttle has described, the plan was very similar to what we're doing now in terms of technological investment, improve our reduce duplication, bring services together, make the council more efficient. So that was the plan. What we didn't have was the level of detail in the plan that we published in January this year. So we had a plan to develop much more detailed plans, but what we are now, or in January, those plans are much further developed. So it's about, if I may, degregations of, is that the right phrase, about how detailed the plans are. So there was always a plan to make the council more efficient. What we've got now is a much more detailed plan that we're moving into the implementation phase of.
Before I ask Gary if he wants to do a follow-up, I just need to jump in there because I'm slightly confused. So you had great confidence in a plan to create a plan, because that wasn't how it came across at full council when you said it. I'm just trying to get that married in my head, because obviously when we voted for the budget, we kind of voted on your assurance that you had great confidence in the plan. And I just want to understand that a little bit more. Is that what you mean?
So if we cast our mind back to various budget scrutiny and then cabinet and then full council, and if you look at the cabinet papers and council papers, there's a recognition that there's significant risk associated with that, and that's why we've set aside an £8.6 million earmark reserve specifically. There was considerable debate, which I'm sure we can all remember, about actually should we just plug the gap with reserves straight away and then say we'll work on our future council behind the scenes, but we concluded that we wouldn't do that, that we'd set the ambitious target and then we'll have the reserves as a safety net. So I highlighted the risks, and that's my job, and I highlighted the risk that if we were unsuccessful, it wouldn't jeopardise the finances of the council. And I think that was recognised. It's very clear in the documentation. But it was a plan to develop a plan. The other factor that I said was that we need to get going, and then if we reach the autumn and there's no sign of the money starting to come out, or there's no sort of confidence, then we'd need to revisit the situation. And that's, I brought the autumn forward to the May, and that's where the change of direction at that point was to make the existing programme much broader and to bring in an external partner, invest in an external partner to accelerate the plans. So from your statutory finance officer, I explained the risks to you, they were debated, I developed a contingency plan, and I executed that contingency plan.
Thank you. I won't go into all the member questions now. I will come back to Gary. So just so I make sure I'm understanding, you had great confidence in the plan to create the plan, and then with all of the changes, you then created that plan, which is what you expected to do anyway, and still didn't make the savings, is what I'm hearing so far, but we'll come back to that shortly. Gary, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aidan. I would suggest that we were more advanced than that, because I think that at the meeting we had in the executive suite in February, with Lisa was there, and we discussed allocating, I believe, £200,000+ to additional staffing that she was going to recruit because she needed them to carry out this work. And that suggested to me that we were moving forward at pace. And what actually happened, of course, we went into PERDA, we then went into elections, and then we came back, and things had changed. And so at some point in that process, I would suggest that things changed. And I would also suggest that perhaps not all of the directorates would be were supportive. At the end of the day, when we were asked at the budget meeting, one of the final council meetings, of course, everybody wanted to know, what's your plan, what are you going to do? Oh, no. But of course, we all know in this room that plan, and the question before this meeting is pertinent, it would result in redundancies. And no one was certain how many or how few, and no one wanted to stand up in this chamber and say that many people would likely be made redundant because it was unfair. So the questions were not answered, I think, at the time. So my supplementary question is like, what happened and why did it really stop?
Thank you, Councillor Sutton, Chair. Lisa Cotton, Corporate Director for Transformation Customer Cultural Services. Really welcome the question, and you are absolutely right. We did invest in more staff and resources to accelerate the plan at the time, and that's detailed in 2.18, where we have responded to key lines of inquiry around data and resources and how we utilise those resources. Immediately, we did set the tasks and the allocation of those staff to review services across the council. So those teams worked really hard with all of our services to think about different ways of delivering, looking at their processes, looking at ways of redesigning, looking at ways of using technology. And yes, there were improvements that we could find. Yes, there were savings that we could identify, but they were not significant enough working individually as services. We needed to think about this in an organisational wide way. We also made our investigations and looked through with every director at thinking the unthinkable, reimagining the council. How could we do anything else to find significant savings for the organisation? Those have been detailed in the plan here. We went through those. Some are in the 25, 26 now plans. So ways of commissioning differently, service reviews, thinking about those technologies, use of assets. So we are absolutely building upon those, but they were much longer term. So they would not have delivered in year. So we did use those resources wisely. We looked at those reviews, and within that short period of time, we came back to the organisation that actually we needed to expand the plans, look cross-council at ways of delivering a new operating model for the organisation and bring in those technologies at scale. Just also to pick up on the question around directorate transformations, those were still continuing. So in section 3, we've detailed the significant amount of change and transformation that was continuing throughout 2024, which required a lot of resource allocation to that too. So those works were continuing in those directorates that had existing large, significant transformation programs.
Thank you. I just want to make a couple of points. I will then go back. I just want to make a couple of to make it clear to everybody, while scrutiny can be perceived as very negative and constructive criticism at points, I think we need to put on record now how much amazing work Lisa's team and everybody has done in doing really good, meaningful transformation since this council was created, because there is a huge amount of success in transformation. We are just talking about one particular scenario where we have some questions on it. And I don't want us to just feel like we're being very negative when there is a huge amount of excellent transformation has taken place, and we really support that. So I want to make that very clear to begin with. I also want to mention twice now we've heard lines of inquiry that we produced. So I was asked for some lines of inquiry, and my response is, I can't give you lines of inquiry because I haven't seen a plan or any paper. However, the general things I would like in there are probably these. So these lines of inquiry were just guesses because we had no information to go with. I'm just aware now it's been mentioned twice, lines of inquiry, which actually the committee had no say in, and I actually just said, well, I can't because we don't know what it is. And I just want to make that very clear beforehand. So then other members that aren't, people that are not members of the committee, Andrew, you'd like to speak again?
Thank you, Chair, for inviting me back in. And I'd be the first to acknowledge, for example, the transformation work in the library service that Lisa Cotton and her team undertook, because I know when we started that piece of work at the time, people were saying, you're going to shut the libraries. And we said, no, we're not. And the outcome is, no, we didn't shut the libraries. We protected them and transformed them. And I hope going forward we will see more of that work. But I have to return to the period just prior to the election and following on from that. The then cabinet members at the time, which included myself, had a sense that officers were stalling for time to see what the outcome of the election would be, and as a result probably took their foot off the gas and didn't re-engage with putting their foot back on the gas until sometime after the euphoria of the new administration taking place had calmed down. So instead of pursuing an agenda of transformation, we were dealing with things like the fiasco around parking charges, which descended into farce, frankly, in Weymouth. To what extent did that cause the delay in getting transformation across? And could the senior officer confirm to me, or a political person from the administration, that actually they have been quietly told to go slow in dealing with issues in Conservative-held wards?
Point of clarity, so were they told to go slow before the administration, before the change or after? After. Okay, so that's slightly off. So I'm going to go with the question to officers about taking the foot off the brakes will be answered by an officer. The political one, I think we could give an option if Ben wanted to respond. I think that one might be for the leader of the opposition, and he's not here. So I don't think it'd be fair to ask a member that isn't the leader to respond. Is that okay? I'm sorry. I think that one should really be safe for him. As long as you're happy with that, Ben. If you want to answer as the person, okay, excellent. So we'll go to the officer one instead, the officer question.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair, for your comments earlier about wider transformation. And I think Lisa's team has done a great job, but it's transformation is across the organisation. And this is one of the crucial points, I think. I will come to the question. A crucial point that we've been successful at a directorate-based transformation process. Children's Services have done amazing work over recent years. We've heard about libraries. What we're trying to do now is to move from a directorate-based transformation process to a council-wide resourced and planned transformation. So rather than resource and plan in individual directorates with the occasional kind of conflicts, what we're trying to do is plan transformation on an organisational basis. It's taken us time to get to that planning approach. So do I think that officers took their foot off the gas? I don't think so, in the sense that, first of all, we report. So, as Chief Finance Officer, we're reporting to senior leadership team on a monthly basis about the financial position. We're flagging up concerns before the financial year has even started. So, in April, sort of March, April time, we're saying we need to be delivering on our future council. I think an election and a change of administration is inevitably our attention has to go into that area, be it inducting all councillors, inducting and meeting and greeting cabinet members and doing all of those things. So were we fully focused on the transformation programme? Inevitably not. Was it a conscious, let's take the foot off the gas? No, it was trying to squeeze the transformation programme in alongside all the other induction and all the other pieces of work that we were doing. But throughout, as a senior leadership team, we were very conscious of the financial implications of this. So I come back to the timeline. So sort of May, we're recognising that we can't give it our full attention. We need external support. How can we do that? Let's bring in an external partner that's done this before. So I think that's the context from an officer capacity and perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's absolutely fair that you would say that whether or not it's a choice to take the foot off the gas, the foot did come off and has to come off during a period of purdah and elections. I can see that. I think that's a fair comment. So I understand that. I'm going to go to any other non-member that wishes to. Ben, do you want to come in at this point, Ben?
Ben Wilson, South East Purbeck, portfolio holder for corporate development and transformation. I'm listening to what everyone is saying here. I can't help but feel that we're maybe focusing on the wrong question. The question of whether there was or there wasn't a plan is obviously what we've been debating. What I'm actually thinking as I listen to this is how long does it take to deliver a transformation of the scale of which is being discussed here? Now, Lisa Cotton has already pointed out that there was a scaling up of the ambition of that transformation when the new administration came in. And I would like to point out that PwC were instructed in May 2024. So the suggestion that there was a foot off the pedal or a big gap, there was no big gap from what I can see. Councillor Suttle's, I understand what Councillor Suttle has pointed out as some of the potential issues that were identified that needed addressing. And I also understand what Lisa Cotton has pointed out is the need to then scale up the transformation. What then happened after May and after we'd instructed PwC is they looked at it from a whole council perspective. Now, I do want to address something that Councillor Parry raised around bringing in external consultants, and also Unison raised. You bring in external consultants, yes, sometimes when you don't have the capabilities, and you bring in their expertise, and sometimes when you don't have the capacity and you need additional support. But more than both of those, you bring in external consultants because you need someone to hold a mirror up to the organisation. And when you're looking at it from a full council perspective, that is something that people within the council are not equipped to do for themselves. So I stand by the decision to bring in the third parties in May 2024, and they have subsequently followed a process of understanding the issues and defining the solutions, and that is what I've been fortunate to inherit from November 2024. That was the business case that is presented. They have followed that process continuously. There have been no further gaps in that process. So I just want to reiterate the point. A transformation of this scale takes time. We are working on that timeline, and we're now, as we're now saying, in the implementation phase, and that is why we will see a step change in activity going forward.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, not so much a question, but I really thank you for your input on that, and I think it's important to hear from the Cabinet member that is in charge of the current programme. And I think I want to make very clear that all of this part we're talking about now actually did not happen on Ben's watch, so to speak. And I think it's very clear to make that there. I'm going to move to members of the committee now, and I'm going to start by a question. I will go to Louis after. I've got one for myself I want to tidy up very quickly. We've heard repeatedly about it changing to a full council transformation as opposed to being directorate level. I'm confused because as someone that sat in the transformation and performance meetings, it was always full council, not directorate level. Every conversation was, when we work in silos, we make minimal savings, that's not good. We want to avoid duplication over the full council. So I don't understand how we've always done it full council, but now you're saying that we didn't do it full council until this year. And that doesn't parry with what I've experienced myself. I was sat in those meetings, so I would like to know why you think we weren't, because you were in the meetings as well. We're both there, so we know that was the case, so I'm a bit confused.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The previous administration had monthly performance board meetings where we looked at transformation and progress against it. What I'm trying to describe is the way that we've previously operated transformation in the council is that each directorate will have its own transformation team, and they'll be working on various programs. And so for the directorate-based programs that only impact on that directorate, off they go. The reality is that most of these programs will require staffing changes, so you need HR support, you need IT support, you need financial support. So that all draws on a central resource. And by having individual directorate programs all doing amazing work, but at their pace, it makes it really hard and ultimately inefficient to resource that central, to resource those individual programs. And it makes it really difficult to prioritise because it ends up who shouts loudest gets the resource. So what's different now is that the transformation programs that we've developed that are signed off in terms of the full business case is we are changing the way the organisation operates, and it impacts on every single directorate. And so in order to do that, we are centralising the transformation resource in the council under Lisa. So we've got detailed oversight of all the individual changes as well as the council-wide, and therefore we're able to prioritise the delivery and prioritise the resourcing. And this is where Nina's role is as well. So that's what I'm describing. So a lot of transformation going on, but it's in a much more coordinated, sequenced and resourced base now.
Thank you, fantastic. So the old system was that you had the centralised transformation team and they would then have business partners allocated to different directorates and different areas. That's how it used to be back when I was involved. So what is that structure now that's different?
So it's more than that. So the business partners were about day-to-day service. What we've actually got in both children's and adults is program management offices running their transformation programs. The difference is the paper has signalled and Cabinet has agreed the principle that we have one large central team now as opposed to the federated model that we had previously.
Thank you. That helps me understand it a bit more, and I thank you for that clarity and that nuance of change. I get that. Thank you. Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, coming on from Councillor Wilson's comments about the right questions and about how long it would take to carry out a delivery plan, I think the biggest concern I have is not the fact that the 8 million wasn't met. I think the biggest concern is that none of the amount of money was met, as far as we're looking at. Surely some savings should have been met in this target. On section 3, there's a list of transformations for 24, 25, but there's no financial data listed next to them, which I found a bit odd. So is that a separate group of savings that were made outside of this, or did that transformation make no savings whatsoever? Because also, if we're also talking about the fact that we didn't meet this target but spent £200,000 on extra officers, and surely we'd be arguing that the transformation not only didn't save any money, it actually cost money. But going back to the sort of history of this, a budget was set in May 2024 at full council with a savings target. In May, which was 3 months later, there was a change of administration. Officers have a duty to carry out the budget that was passed democratically at the full council, unless the new administration decided they wanted to change that or fiddle with it or whatever, which is their right in many ways, as long as they still pursue a balanced budget. So therefore, what I want to ask was, is the failure to deliver these savings a failure by the new cabinet members to identify savings and failing to discuss with their predecessors? Was it a conscious decision by those cabinet members not to pursue identifications of savings or this plan? Or is it the fact that savings weren't truly there? Or did officers drop the ball and identify savings due to being overcome by the change? Or was it the change itself, as in new cabinet members dropping the ball or failing to carry out what was set at full council due to either their incompetency, due to their inability to carry it out, or due to a conscious decision?
I think you skirt the political line well there. With that, there's a nuance of, I think Aidan can answer why it's zero. Because as we said, I think, is it Simon Clifford or Nick Ireland? One of them is, Councillor Ireland and Councillor Clifford have said it was zero. There was no plan, it was not saved. So actually, Councillor Lou makes the point that it's not just a zero saving, but actually has cost us money. Could we talk on that? And then I guess between you and Ben, have a quick conversation about who wants to decide if that zero and the lack of change was caused by officer change and not filling out, or if that was a political choice and where that came from, I guess.
Thank you. So can great question, and I think it really comes to the heart of what we're trying to describe in the paper. So paragraph 1.2 describes savings of 17.8 million in addition to, at the time, 12 million, subsequently 8.6 million of our future council savings. So when we set the budget, I talked about the really challenging context of local government finance. We had a 17.8 million savings target and then a further 12 for our future council transformation. So at quarter 3 for the financial year, our projected overspend, I think it's around about 11 million or so, and all the indications are by the time we get to outturn, that'll have improved. So we've made significant savings generally on the our future council savings, and that's been really, really hard work. So that does leave this, why haven't we been able to make any headroom on the 8.6 million? And I think, is it officer incompetence? Is it political direction? I think that this is at the heart of what the paper's trying to describe. There's some contextual change. There's the fact that we had a plan to develop a plan rather than a hugely detailed plan ready to go. I think there's recognition, as Councillor Wilson has described, that the sheer scale of what we're trying to achieve, it does take time. We as an organisation, through this time of change, have worked really, really hard to get us to this point. And what I'm hoping that you'll take from this meeting is that it has been a really difficult year of transition, but we're in a much stronger place now with a much more detail. So I think messages are we've made significant savings. We haven't been able to make the 8.6 million so far. Transformation is complex. It is an invest-to-save concept, and we will need to make those savings next financial year. And ultimately, as our union colleagues were describing earlier, this is about headcount reduction. It's going to cost less to run the organisation, and we are approaching this in a very careful way to ensure that services are the impact is minimal for our residents, because we could just take a very blunt approach of wholesale redundancies, but that inevitably has a impact on the quality and timeliness of services for our residents. So we're taking a very careful, nuanced approach. So that's the officer response.
I'm going to push back slightly, because I think we're going to be talking around a big point that we're all going to try to say the same thing in very different ways. And I want to try to get that out of the way with now. When we set the budget, we were given a high level of assurance that you believed we would make £8.6 million of savings through our future council specifically. That 8.6 million saving has actually been not even zero, but a negative cost. What went wrong? Because normally, when you give us assurance on something, it is something we can hang our hat on your assurance. Understanding you massively highlighted the risk and you put in a safety net if there was a problem of having general reserve. So you did all the right things, not questioning what was done. That was excellent and done well. But there's a big difference when of 8.6 to actually not even zero, but costing money. And I think that's what's really confused us here, because that's not we didn't meet it. It appears like we just didn't do anything. And I know we did do stuff. So what happened? Why was that judgment call? Because I think that's what a lot of people are trying to talk to is, why was that judgment call not right in this particular situation? And I want to highlight, this is not what we expect, because normally your judgment calls are fantastic. I'm not want to denigrate anything you do, yeah? I just want to find out what went wrong here, because we don't want this to happen again in the future. And I think that's what we're trying to actually get to here. And I'm trying to do it in really plain English rather than politically talking around the subject.
Okay, so I am going to be at risk of repeating myself, because the information is in the report and I've expressed myself again. But to get to the number of it, so I appreciate you're not criticising the way the budget was set, but we knew that the 8.6 million was going to be a real challenge, and I highlighted those risks in the paper, in meetings, and set aside a strategy to mitigate that risk, hence setting aside the reserve. I set that safety net about doing something different in the autumn. I brought that decision forward by bringing in PwC. So the question is, why haven't we been, so it was risky, I highlighted those risks. Nevertheless, we set ourselves an ambitious target. So why haven't we been able to deliver that? I think at the heart of this is we underestimated the complexity of what was required. So it's not as though we had a plan sufficiently detailed where we just press go, systems changed, everything's upgraded, and off we go, and we're able to release staff and reduce the pay bill. So the time and the complexity that we underestimated, PwC as external advisors have held the mirror up to us and explained that even the timeline that we've got now is challenging, and it does require us to invest in technology to implement that technology. It requires us to redesign so many of our services as well. And I think throughout that time, we also had a significant turnover of staff. So we've got going to have a different chief exec now, but we're going to have a different director of adult services, different director of children's services, a new director of place services, all in this time where we're trying to design the organisation, and we've got a new political leadership as well. So I find myself with two hats on in this space. As your chief finance officer, I want everything to be just so and have absolute confidence and say everything's fine. I've got a statutory responsibility. As your director of transformation as well, your exec director of responsible transformation, I kind of do need to disrupt and to set some ambitious and challenging targets. And what we've got is here has come together. So I set about an organisational strategy that recognised those risks, mitigated those risks, and I think and I believe we find ourselves in a much stronger position now.
Aidan, thank you, because I think what you've just done, I think you may have, I know you say you're repeating yourself, but I think you actually worded it differently then, and that helped me, because what I was really trying to work on is, I remember vividly in full council you standing up and giving great assurance that our future council would save the money. And then you've said in here that the plan was to create a detailed plan, which is exactly what you've now done. And so it sounds to me like you had belief in it, knowing this was what you were going to do, and you were going to do it. And I think, so why hasn't it happened? But you've made it really clear that actually you believed all of that, but in this situation, actually it was more complex than we thought, and there's a lot more to do. And so rather than doing it badly, we've then gone, okay, we'll take the time and do it properly. And I think, and I commend you for saying that, and that actually answers a lot of my confusion with where we seem to have conflicting reports coming from the same person, yeah? So that's really useful, so thank you for that. I also just want to point out, I think we should look at a change in administration and a large-scale change of some of the top SLT as the best possible time to do large-scale change. Because actually new people have new ideas, aren't tied into old animosities and silo working, and I know for a fact that certain previous directors didn't want to engage with the Our Future Council programme because people get very protective over their services and staff. And I think we shouldn't see them and a change in chief exec as a problem, but as a really good potential. And then do you want to come back? I've got other people that want to come in as well. It's up to you, Aidan. Yep.
Thank you for that, and thank you for recognising my belief in this programme, my colleagues' belief, and we've got political belief, and I think belief in it from across the council chamber, and that's been one of the really assuring things. Part of the time we'd underestimated was how long it would take to persuade colleagues across the organisation that this is the right thing to do, and we're still trying to do that in some areas. Thank you.
Councillor O'Leary, sorry, I really hijacked your question then, but it just got me to the point I wanted to get to answer. Sorry, buddy, I won't do that again.
I'll hold you to that. I must say I am quite concerned at the lack of cabinet members in this meeting, considering the importance of this item. This was set and signed off by the previous administration, so I'm going to assume that the previous cabinet members and lead members did have savings in mind. So what I would like to have asked the current cabinet members of the big ticket, sort of big budget portfolios, is did they try and get from their predecessors any of those savings and ideas to take forward? Because I currently feel that the administration taking easy options of cutting services as opposed to transformation that I assume was identified by the previous administration that people had in mind. If not, I wouldn't like to think that that would have been agreed at full council or signed off. So that's what I'd like to ask is, was there any engagement by current cabinet members with former cabinet members to identify savings? And also coming on from Ms. Cotton said that she did identify some savings, albeit small ones. Therefore, did she not recommend them? If she did recommend them, why weren't they carried out?
So I'm going to split it again into the two, the political and the non-part. So I'm going to ask Ben, I think you could speak to the fact, when looking at the Our Future Council programme, did you engage with the previous cabinet members for the feed into it? I think that would be a fair one for the political side, because obviously we can't ask cabinet members that aren't here to comment on if they met with their counterparts. However, great question to full council cabinet. And then on the ones that were done, and actually I've got a couple of ex-cabinet member and cabinet members that are here, so actually we'll let them join in on it. Why not? We've got a few here. So Ben, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go to cabinet members instead? To you?
Ben Wilson, South East Purbeck. So obviously I joined Cabinet in November, so maybe it's not targeted at me. I have worked and continue to work very closely with Councillor Haynes, and we share ideas now. And obviously Councillor Holloway, I did a full handover from. So in that regard, I'm not sure that answers your question, Councillor O'Leary, but in that regard, I ensured continuity, and I re-emphasise that I do work closely with Councillor Haynes. I just also want to make a point, and maybe Lisa Cotton would want to come back in on this. Lisa sort of specified, whilst we looked at our future council and what's in scope for that in one chunk, there were savings and transformation work happening in the other directorates. So from a directorate perspective, those ideas were carried through, and Lisa led the way on delivering some of that.
Thank you, Ben. I'm actually going to quickly run around the Cabinet members, post-Cabinet members in here, because I think it's a fair question to ask. And I've had 3 different Cabinet or pre-Cabinet offer to answer this question, so we're going to go around everybody. For adult services, do you have crossover, changeover meetings with Councillor Somper?
Thank you, Chair. Steve Robinson, Litchfield Travels in Upton, portfolio holder for adult social care. Thank you very much for the question. Also, as Councillor O'Leary says, one of the big ticket items. I've tried on a number of occasions to have meetings with Councillor Somper. Unfortunately, due to busy diaries, that has not always been achievable. What we have been able to do is liaise, and a number of the transformation programmes that were agreed within the department whilst Councillor Somper was on Cabinet have continued. And the intention is to continue with that continuance. I haven't thought that sentence through, but I'm sure the message comes across.
Now, I'm very aware that not all Cabinet members are here, so I'm going to ask that we try to stay away from any reasons you have or haven't met, but just have you or haven't you, because with everything, there is going to be 2 sides to every story, and we're not giving it a fair hearing. So this is very much just either you have or you haven't, quick, rough straw poll that is not provable and is not taken as definitely the case. Yeah, I just want to be very clear. So I suddenly realise that people aren't here might say, "Oh, but I've never said no," or things like that. So we've got one yes and one no so far. Cabinet and pre-Cabinet. Shane.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think it's any secret my relationship with my predecessor, Councillor Walsh, was very, very close, and we still continue to meet now. And I did meet with him when he was a Cabinet member, and I also continue to meet with my shadow representative, Councillor Flower, who, as you know, I have a very close relationship with as well. Yeah, I should mention that's a professional relationship. Thank you.
To be fair, Shane, I just took it that you had, because I know what you're like with working with people. You're fantastic. So, yeah, great. Councillor Parry.
Thank you. I have to say, other than a few kind words over a cup of coffee to my successors in both the Children's Directorate and the Property and Assets Directorate, no, I wouldn't say there has been. And I refer you back, of course, to the Liberal Democrats' public commitments and manifesto commitments not to work with Conservatives. They made that very obvious and very public. Therefore, any opportunities to actually work in a really collaborative way are greatly restricted from the start. Where there are lines of communication, they are actually, as Councillor Bartlett suggested, they are because of previous associations and friendships that are formed in an informal way. It's disappointing, but there we are. That's the way they wanted it. That's what the hand we're dealt with. And as the former chief executive put it to me, I hope you settle into opposition well. Well, now they're going to start finding out exactly what that pushback looks like under scrutiny.
I think at this point we've clearly crossed into a very political realm and away from the scrutiny, so I'm going to draw a line in the sand here and say it's mixed, some have had handovers, some haven't, and we're going to draw a line under that political part, and actually let's get back to scrutinising the paper ahead of us, because we're meant to be talking about what's on here. We've gone far off it. Anybody else like to comment on the actual Our Future Council paper that's in front of us here? Yep, please go for it, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Craig Monks, Bedminster Ward. I've just got a few quick questions, but the first one would be the silliest and most simplistic one. But as a new councillor to the council, and actually looking around committee members, I think quite a few of us are fairly new, so obviously haven't been part of the historical process. But in terms of transformation, the transformation work or our future council, how far back does that actual work go? And what was it kind of look like? So I know the Chair's referred to committees and groups that have been set up. I assume that was cross-party and involving various people. It doesn't need necessarily a long answer, but just to give me a feel, like when did this start? Was it 2019, and what's it look like up until now? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Monks. Lisa Cotton again. Thank you for the opportunity. Absolutely, we have had, as described, transformation programmes ongoing since the start of Dorset Council in 2019, largely in those directorate-focused areas. So when we were thinking of how to converge all of the processes and ways of working across the organisation, and how we think about how we deliver our services to our customers and communities, those transformation programmes have been really well identified and documented, and there have been governance programmes around those, so governance frameworks around those. What we have done within our Future Council is we absolutely did take that opportunity to think about how we do this across Council. We have brought forward that went through overview in January of this year, a new transformation plan for the next 4 years that really does bring in new fresh governance around across council way of working, thinking about our transformation as one council. And some of what we've had to do is actually build that evidence. So we often considered that there were areas of duplication. We often considered from our customer feedback that there were areas that we could improve on, that there was fragmentation and difference of how customers interacted with us across the organisation. But we really needed to be able to evidence that and look at it at a much deeper level, which is where we've pivoted those plans. So yes, we've got a lot that we can signpost you to show that our transformation progression since 2019 is really, really impressive, and we can really evidence the savings and also the outcomes of those transformation programmes. And now it's really time for us to elevate that with these new plans around thinking about cross-council as that improvement to customer experience. So we've really kind of brought those governance processes to bear now through those reports that have been coming to Council over the last few months.
Thanks for that answer. And so just to follow on from that, then sort of kind of fast forwarding slightly from 2019 to the budget term that we're obviously discussing today. So in very simple terms, the way I would describe where we are is that the previous administration set a budget, roughly identified some savings, that was signed off as a balanced budget process. So we set up the plan, and then we passed it over to the new administration to deliver it, essentially. Am I right in the previous answers and suggesting that the kind of switch in mindset in terms of the kind of previous way of working to the whole council approach and external support and all that kind of work took place in that transition? Because obviously within the report it talks about that the change of administration and senior officers leaving will have had an effect on that process. I suppose when did the light bulb switch on and you sat in the office and thought, oh, actually this isn't going to work, we need to do something new? Was that kind of before or after that that switch, please?
Thanks. So I just build on Lisa's response in that. So our Future Council as a brand, as a savings programme, I think probably around about February 23. Okay, and at that point, it was modest savings, so 500,000, maybe 800,000, by being better with the contact centre, predominantly. So more efficient part of the organisation. And then we fast forward into sort of later on where we've got this huge savings challenge for the organisation that scales up that 800,000 to 12 million. And we recognise very, very quickly that we're not going to save 12 million by making some tweaks to the contact centre. That's when we have to do a really significant recognise that we're going to have to change the way the whole council operates. So, and that change that I've just described there sort of happens in the run-up and through the election period. So as Councillor Suttle described earlier, we're kind of, as we approach the PERDA period, there's clearly a recognition that tweaking the contact centre is not going to be enough. We need to do a whole organisational change, and that's going to require technology investment, and that's going to require every directorate working differently. It's not just corporate services reducing its headcount. It's a really significant change. So there's a recognition going through PERDA, going up to PERDA about that. And this is where we've got plans to develop plans. And it comes back to the definition of what you call a plan. So in the run up to PERDA, did I have a plan that says broadly we think the headcount reductions in this area will be this many, in this area there'll be that? No, we didn't. But coming out of the election in May, that's when we realised we're not going to be able to deliver this on our own. This is where we need PwC to come in to build on the plan for a plan, give us that more specifics, and that's led to the business case, because it takes a long time to develop these things, but that's led to the business case that's leading to a really significant investment in technology, and we're at a stage now where we broadly know the areas of where we're going to make those staffing efficiencies. We don't know them precisely yet, and that's the next phase of work. So I think that sort of through that PERDA period, we had a growing anxiety that we're not going to be able to deliver based on what we've got at the moment. We need to do something different. So hopefully that helps.
Sorry, Jonathan Mayer signalled, and so I should let Jonathan speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And I've been sitting back, I think, and letting Aidan Dunn do all the heavy lifting. And sitting back from this and listening to Councillor Monk's question, was there a light bulb moment as we were approaching elections? I don't think it was quite that, but there is something for me. If I'm here in 4 years' time, and I'm currently your interim returning officer, I think in the run up to the election period, ahead of the pre-election period even, I'll be reflecting into the senior leadership team just what a space we're moving into as we approach elections, and to just reinforce the extent to which that pre-election period and the period that comes afterwards as you wait for a new administration to come in, just how disruptive that can be on achieving everything you're trying to achieve. So when councillors come to set a budget in February 2029, I think we'll have to be particularly conscious of the confidence that we have in delivering a budget across an election period, because when I look back, I don't think any of us as the current officers in this council have lived through a change of administration and the disruption that brings to what you're going to achieve. So I certainly won't be underestimating what that is like if I'm here in 2029.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. And I think it's good to say that, from my understanding, lawyers can't possibly die. They live forever. So I'm sure you will still be here then, and I look forward to still working with you. I think it's a fair point that was made, that you've made there, and I think it was a learning curve and a learning experience, and that's the job of Scrutiny, is to pull out when something went wrong, why did it go wrong, what can we put in place to stop that in the future. And that is the goal of today. It seems like sometimes it's trying to find blame. It's not trying to find blame. It's trying to find the reasons it went wrong so we can change it. The one thing I've just realised I need to actually clarify, because it's something that I've been misunderstanding the whole way through this process. And I think if I'm the one misunderstanding it, other people might be as well. So we hear the term Our Future Council, and they've heard it referred to as just tweaking a particular service. I had no idea that was the case, because we're reusing a name of what something else was. The whole way through the previous administration, we had the Performance and Transformation Board. And that's what I thought Our Future Council was, because the Our Future Transformation Board, that has always been looking at the whole council approach and that big stuff. And so when Aidan things like, oh, we were just looking at tweaking one service, I'm thinking, that's just not accurate, but it is, because what was technically termed our future council must be that just tweaking one service. Whereas actually, I think from here, in reality, we're talking about the Performance and Transformation Board becoming this. Because this, our Future Council 2024 that we're looking at, is looking at the large-scale plan to make a detailed plan that was created through meetings with SLT and Cabinet, where they did identify the likely number of jobs that would have to be cut and the rough directorate split those would be on. Because that was all done, but I guess that was done by the Performance and Transformation Board as opposed to this technical Our Future Council. So I think that's where I've had sort of this misunderstanding and shock from when Aidan said things, that actually when you hear one side talking, we're talking about the Performance Board as much as we are talking about this. So I just want to put that clarify in there. Do you need to re-clarify what I've said? Okay.
And I think that's really helpful to understand because from starting as our Future Council as a relatively small service change, it's become, and it is now, the entire council's family of transformation programmes. And that's and as part of that, it's a scaling up of the ambition and the financial savings associated with it.
So to clarify, rather than it evolving into that, it's absorbed because that already existed. I think that's really a point we need to make, is that Performance and Transformation Board already existed. We've now just taken that into our Future Council. It's become much bigger. Yeah, because it sounds like we're starting doing something we haven't been doing for half a decade, which we have been. And so I think it's really important to make that point that this isn't new, this is a continuation. The technical wording makes it look new when it's not. Councillor, sorry, Craig, come back.
I thought you were going to forget about me there, Chair. No, I was just going to echo your words with regard to Jonathan. And I think that's one of the things we can feed back in terms of the learning process. I know you mentioned the PERDA period in my previous question, and I'm all for the benefit of the thousands watching at home, but essentially the PERDA period is that allocated time frame during the election process. So it's kind of April, May, essentially, is what we were talking about. So the kind of follow-on question I'd have, which it has been briefly touched on, so I'm not going to slightly dwell on it, but it might be something to consider as a learning process moving forward. So in that window, and maybe the use of a light bulb analogy was a slightly crude one, but in that window, things have changed. And obviously that's been complicated because we're in this PERDA period. In that process, kind of post-election world, I know that we've kind of had the round robin of past and present portfolio holders, discussing how little or how much conversation they had, but that in itself is slightly concerning to me. And I just wonder, so I guess my question is, what, if any, formal process happened of a handover between officers and past and present portfolio holders to sit down, late May and say, right, this is what we were doing as former portfolio holder for traffic. I identified X. It's up to you now whether you take it on or not. What was the formality of that process? Because I love sharing a coffee with many colleagues across the chamber, but I would say that's not quite good enough considering the scope. And depending on the answer, perhaps in 4 years' time, we bed something like that in moving forward.
So I'll talk about my own experience as Exec Director for Corporate Development, and then I'll talk about senior leadership team as well.
So I think the really important part there is the formal process. Because if there isn't one, I think what we're trying to point out here is, obviously, is there a formal process that we're going to have in that handover, or is that a sort of recommendation you would like us to make to create one? Jonathan.
Chairman, I know you like short answers. There is no formal process that exists in local government. And my earlier point that if I was doing this in 4 years' time, who knows what the outcome of an election in 2029 is? But I think I would expect us to be better prepared in case there was a handover from one administration to another, and to perhaps be facilitating those actively facilitating those conversations a bit more.
So are you happy, Craig, that we park that a little bit now and actually put it towards a resolution, which we'll discuss if that's correct and vote on it shortly, but part of the resolution to be that a it'd have to be semi-formal, because I don't think we can't tie the hands of someone that doesn't win an election to come back, in the case of things like David Walsh, who was previous and then not elected again, but a semi-formal procedure or policy of how we would like to see that handover occur. Would you be happy to suggest that?
I would be, Chair. I think we've got time to talk, think about that in terms of the different ramifications of whether people return or not. I would like to see if Aidan does have an answer. I don't want to let him quite off the hook, but I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to my question.
Thank you. So I'll just ever so briefly for the finance portfolio. So the transition works. So the way that we manage our finance portfolio in terms of the political interface, I have a weekly meeting with the finance portfolio holder, and joined by Sean as well as my deputy. So sort of right up until the PERDA period, it was meeting with Gary on a weekly basis, looking at the budgets, how's that going, all the ranging through to collection rate on the collection fund. So then through the PERDA period, understandably tapers off, and then the election, and then the new portfolio holder starts. And so as Councillor Clifford is the new portfolio holder, so and as a new councillor as well. And he's very, very good at and very quick at picking things up. But we then pick up on the weekly cycle then. And so the briefing for a finance portfolio holder is we're kind of building up knowledge. So ranging from, we've got the routine cycle of business, so we're going straight into the June cabinet meeting. There's a finance report there that we've written for him and kind of bring him up to speed. So what I wouldn't do, or at the moment, is to bring the previous finance portfolio holder together with the new one and kind of facilitate a conversation. But in terms of the technicalities of the finance briefing, I'd say exactly the same to Councillor Clifford as I would have said to Councillor Suttle. It's, these are the facts. And then what I'm looking for actually is the political steer on what's the policy direction, sort of what areas do you want us to look at. So there's nothing formal, but there is a kind of business continuity aspect to this as well. So I hope that helps.
Sorry, this will be my last one, because otherwise I'm taken up there. But thank you for the answer. And I think you make some really good points. And actually, I think you've just kind of inadvertently highlighted one of the challenges with this. And I'm trying to skirt around I'm trying to do as good a job as Councillor O'Neary in terms of skirt around the political element of things. But I think what does fail slightly is the political element of things, because it's easy for officers to have their, your briefings and your papers to past and present portfolio holders will obviously be the same, your advice will be the same, but it's the individual portfolio holder that changes, and ultimately the political direction of the administration that will influence what happens in the future. So I just wonder, and a kind of an open question, I don't know how we might have that as a recommendation, but if there's how can we formalise a willingness or a necessity, perhaps, for past and present portfolio holders or members of each party to communicate? Because I think that's probably not happened, and I'm not pointing fingers, but I think that's not happened. But regardless of personalities and everything else, and the mist of war post-election, that needs to happen next time, I would suggest. I don't know how we would do that, but we can recommend it, I'm sure.
Before we jump into that, I want to say I think we recommend that they look at a policy to encourage handover periods during any change of portfolio, because actually can be very different views from the same party as well. And I think the nuance there is, whilst Aidan hands over the facts, that's not always the same as handing over, I've made this decision and this decision because in 6 months' time it means we can make this decision, which is what you want to have passed over from the political side of things as an explanation for why those decisions have been made. And so I think rather than going into what that policy should contain, we could have a recommendation that they should look at creating a policy that covers that. Are we happy with that as an idea rather than going into it? Councillor O'Leary.
Chairman, on that subject, I think our American friends have a period of transition between presidents, about I think it's from November to January. Obviously, that's a formal transition period, which we can't have it so that one administration's in office but not in power effectively. But if we could call it probably a transition policy.
Do you know what? I think a recommendation to look at a transition style policy is a great idea and really good. I just want to make a slight comment. Does that make PwC Doge? And Councillor Bartlett, please do come in.
Thank you for your indulgence, Chairman. You won't be surprised to know that I think it's a really good recommendation. I'm very much of an opinion that my door is always open to all 81 other members in the chamber. I think we set up this council, which was 6 years ago, with a very civilised chamber. And I think all 82 members that are sat in this council got themselves elected because they wanted to do what they wanted to do for the residents of Dorset, to enable their lives, to better their lives. And I don't think that should be lost. I think for a large extent, we managed to put the politics to one side a lot of the time within this chamber and within the committees, and I think that's a good thing. And I would welcome the opportunity for, I guess, overview to work up some policies around those transitional periods. As I already said, I embraced that myself when I took on my portfolio, and I think it is the right way to go. I think we tend to forget how privileged we are in this chamber that we have maintained that civilised chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. I would say it was really nice when we did have a civilised chamber, and I look forward to getting back to that. I think in committees, I agree, we're very going to take the politics out of it. And I think that's the best thing for people of Dorset. Dorset don't want to see us having a political bum fight. That doesn't help anybody. And we should be focused on helping residents. And I think we can all agree on that unitedly, and that's great. Councillor Bryan, you've been waiting for a very long time to speak, and I believe you have 7.5 pages of notes. So sit back, this is going to be good.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Ray Bryan, and I'm the Vice Chairman of this committee, working very closely with Councillor Knocklacey and obviously the rest of the team. My ward is St Leonard's and St Ives, which I'm very proud of. Luckily, we don't have any car parks, so I don't get any stick over that. I leave all the stick in other people's area. But I'm also the opposition cabinet member for highways and travel. So I thought I'd get all that out in one go. Right, Knock has underestimated how long this is going to take, so I hope you've brought your lunches with you before we get on to the second paper. Couple of points I'd like to raise. First of all, several people have mentioned Lisa and the great work she does. I would like to also add my thanks to her. She and I passed or crossed swords in a previous life when she worked for a different area, and I found her very cooperative, very helpful, and I'm glad to see she's brought that to this council as well. And we're a much better place for having you. So I pass my thanks on to you. It would be remiss of me, after a long conversation with Councillor Jill Haynes about the report that's in front of us, she actually said to me that Nina had done a great job in putting this report together, because it's not an easy report to put together. We can all pick flies out of it, as we can with any paper. But again, thanks for the paper and the time you've taken putting it together. Right. Aidan. Aidan, I'm going to be gentle. A couple of points you've raised that I'm slightly confused by. I think you said that children and adult have their own internal transformation team. I'm intrigued to know how that's going to work. That's like asking the, trying to think of the right way before Jonathan shouts at me.
People to mark their own homework?
Yeah, people marking their own homework. Good point. Thank you, Chairman. And that worries me, because we both know that the transformation has to happen in the big budget items. I notice on the report there's nothing about highways, which I took to heart. But there's nothing about highways there because we don't have a big budget. We spend a lot of money, but luckily most of that money comes from the DFT. It's not local taxpayers' money. Plus the fact that I ran such a tight ship, we didn't have any overspends. But we'll leave that to one side. Can you just confirm that they do have their own transformation team? And how does that fit in with the bigger picture? I'll come back on the rest.
Yeah, thank you. And a little intrigued as what you mean by marking their own homework in terms of this. So can I'll give you my response. So in the paper, there's a table in the middle section at 3.1 that lists all the various transformation programs going on. So if I draw on a few at the top of one of the pages, talks about children's services developing family hubs, children's services Pathfinder, children's services Mockingbird. So what we have within children's services is a team of program and project managers who are making those changes happen. So they're doing the sort of coordinating some of the like staffing restructures, sort of identifying assets and making the changes to processes and systems. So at the moment, Lisa is our corporate director for transformation. Those people in that team don't report to Lisa. They're doing their changes. These changes are really important. They've been agreed through the budget process. But Lisa and Nina can observe those changes, but Lisa doesn't line manage those staff. So that's one example. Meanwhile, you've got similar in adults. There's a really significant transformation program going on in adults. In particular, if you look at the developing a reablement centre, that's a really significant transformation program. There is a dedicated team within adult services that report to the adult services management team. They don't report to Lisa. So that is how, it's not wrong, that's how we've set ourselves up. In terms of over the years, for when the previous administration were in, as Nock was describing, the sort of performance and transformation group, our corporate centre role was to gather information and to report on progress. But we, as a corporate centre, weren't controlling and weren't in charge, let me put it in those terms. So that's the way it's worked previously, it's the way we've set up. But the really significant change in having our Future Council as an overall transformation programme now is that change that we're working through the detail of identifying who the programme and project managers are in those individual directorates and bringing them into the corporate centre. So organisationally, the strategic centre of the organisation is able to have more influence and drive.
Sorry, I'm trying to clarify something. So there are two things I said that don't quite match in my head. I need clarification. I'm trying to remember. Because you're saying that they weren't in charge by, the central corporate team weren't in charge of the transformation projects. I have a distinct memory, I'm sure I'm not going mad, of you being in charge of SEND transport transformation with me. And so see in my head, I'm thinking, but you say you're not in charge, but you were. So could you clarify for me, because I'm confused as me.
Yeah, really good. And this kind of starts to paint some of the complexity of what we've got going on in the organisation. So I mentioned earlier Mockingbird, which is Children's Services Transformation Programme. Children's can deal with that in a self-contained way. So therefore, it's appropriate that it's managed within children's services under the old model. If we take home to school transport, which has done remarkably well since, that is a service that impacts on all aspects of the organisation in terms of the children's services are identifying, they've got policy who needs school transport. Then the Place Directorate is commissioning and organising the transport. And then also it was such an area of significant overspend or increasing spend that I got involved as a sponsor to try and bring that cross-directorate coordination. So this is the complexity. Some transformation programmes can be managed just by the directorate. Some are cross-directorate and therefore require more corporate support. What our Future Council brings starts to plan for the first time transformation on a council-wide basis so that we can do the relative prioritisation.
So in reality, what I'm taking this is a lot of the new things we're doing is actually just formalising what we were already doing and calling it our Future Council. Because previously, when there was the issue, we got a sponsor from SLT to do it. And that's what is now going to happen as standard when needed. We are formalising the good transformation we have done, and then doing that, looking at calling that our future council. And that's kind of what it's, for me, it's because everything we're saying that's new is like, well, that's what we're already doing. Because, and so I guess from that, saying that we're taking the good bits of what we've done and rolling that out as a consistency over the whole board, rather than it just being done in certain places when appropriate. And I think that helps give me belief in the Our Future Council Going Forward programme. Sorry, I'm taking all your questions. I do apologise, Ray.
Can I, so you're right, but there's a really important difference that's going to happen as a consequence of this, and it's going to be uncomfortable, is the prioritisation is now going to be done on an organisational basis rather than an individual directorate basis. So that means that some things won't get done as quickly as directorates had hoped. Other things will get done quicker than they hoped. And that's the really important difference of our future council. It's going to bring that focus and resourcing change.
I was hoping for a simple answer, but you've just raised some other queries now. So I don't understand if children and adult services have their own internal transformation team that don't report to Lisa, who is hopefully the person that's going to make all these savings that don't affect too many of the staff, because there's lots of savings we can still make that don't affect the staff levels. And unfortunately, we can't go into that in this meeting because it's not on the paper. I'm quite surprised that it's not on the paper, but that's a different issue. Can you just explain how Lisa fits in with children and adults, because they're the big money spenders, and if we're going to make savings, then the bulk of the savings has to come from the big money people, the big money departments. Because, again, I'll go back to highways. Highways is about 3.6 million. I'm looking for somebody that'll confirm that. It's about 3.6 million of local taxpayers' money that goes towards highways. If we save 10%, or if highways save 10%, it's still peanuts. And believe me, you try and save 10% on highways, and we'll have every resident jumping up and down on us because their pothole wasn't repaired. But I'll go into that on a different item that I'm coming to. But I just want to understand how the structure is going to work going forward if we don't have a single point of contact for these savings to be all rolled together for the success of this council and for the benefit to our residents. Can you please explain?
Thank you. So the savings from our future council and any savings across the organisation broadly come from two areas. So reducing the pay bill by having essentially fewer staff, or by spending less on our services. And to spend less on our services, our strategy is about demand management, demand avoidance, and trying to sort of prevent those pressures coming through. I mentioned in my previous answer about the way the organisation has been set up until this point about directorate-based approach. One of the big signal changes from through our future council is that Lisa is the programme director for our future council, but it is an SLT-sponsored programme. So SLT are meeting every week for a minimum of an hour to make sure that we're all being consistent, the way that we're managing our resources, the way we're doing recruitment, and making sure that we really understand that if we do this action here, what's the impact on children's services over there if adults do this there. So the individual budget accountability still sits with the directorates and then through our budget managers, but the savings that are going to come through our future council are going to be driven through the SLT programme with a cross-party member oversight holding us to account for delivery, and then the savings will come out, as I say, through a combination of staffing reductions or demand avoidance or service reductions.
Will you stop talking? Because you keep making me ask questions. No, seriously, Aidan. Yes, it was a joke for the members of the public. Aidan, I'm now confused. You mentioned cross-party. Where's that?
The Cross-Party Oversight Committee. What's that?
Sorry, Ben Wilson, South East Purbeck. We have a steering committee that sits at the top of the governance model, and that has representation from all parties within this chamber.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm assuming that's proportionate with the amount of councillors that were elected. Is that the case? Or is it just leaders getting together with portfolio holders? Can you just explain what that is, please?
Ben Wilson. I've not done the maths to ensure that it is in true proportional representation, but we do have representatives from the Liberal Democrats, from the Conservatives, from Labour, from the Greens, and from the Independents. So there is representatives from all of the constituent parts of this chamber.
From my understanding, when a formal group's created, it has to fit certain rules according to our constitution. And I want to make sure that that is the case. If Labour's on there, unless another group have given up a seat, then there should be a lot of everybody else on that group. And I certainly haven't been invited to even apply to be on that group or any notice like that. So I want to make sure if it's a formal group that we're quoting, then it needs to follow our formal guidance. Otherwise, it's not a formal group. We shouldn't be using it.
Chairman, so for formal committees, they should be appointed to on a politically proportionate basis, and a formal committee is appointed to by the full council. But my understanding is that this does not have that same level of formality.
So to clarify, there is not a formal oversight cross-party group for it. And to be clear, that is the legal, so it's not a formal one. So therefore, can we either not say there is or create one? Because I think that would be really good. Yeah? Because it's a great thing. I'm not against the problem. I haven't heard about it. I think we should do it properly if we're good doing it.
So it's a steering group. It's not a decision-making body. So it's not a formal group. In terms of accountability, the overview committee agreed or recommended that Scrutiny here has a role to have oversight of the programme as well. And I anticipate that you'll be exercising that. And I'm really quite conscious that we're straying into next year rather than looking back into this year.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I think it is clear that this is why it was so hard to do the lines of inquiry, because you don't know what you don't know in something as amorphous as this. And I will go back to Ray to continue with questions, but I want to just be very clear that we're going to now bring it to the paper in front of us and the 24-25 Our Future Council programme.
Yeah. Obviously, one of my concerns as we go forward is how we make the savings that we need to make with causing as little damage to both the public services, but also to the morale of our staff, who I have the highest of regard for. I've worked with them for longer than I care to say, but we've got some great people on board, and I was very concerned when we heard from Unison that they feel they've been briefed but not consulted. And I think that's the difference that we've got at the moment. We talked about trying to save 10 million. Between 2019 and 2024, as a council, we had the duty to save a lot of money. And I believe we saved about 130 million in what was a 3-year period, because bearing in mind we had the pandemic in the middle, which really did punch some holes in. So I just wanted to say that whilst 10 million looks an awful lot, there are still many ways in which we can look at savings. And outside of this meeting, I'm going to be talking to John Andrews, who, for everybody's information, I work quite closely with. I meet with him regularly. We attend meetings together. In fact, on Monday, I'm going to a ministerial meeting because he can't go. He's at another meeting. And unfortunately, Councillor Ireland, he's on a days off, according to his calendar. I'm sure he's got something he's up to. But the bottom line is that in my days, if I couldn't go somewhere, I used to send my lead members. And that was the beauty of the lead members. And at some stage, I'm going to raise a question at full council on this, because I still think we're missing out for what was a £60,000 saving on having extra people to go to these important meetings. Can I just go back? Whose decision was it to disband the performance board? Because that's where we used to get all our information from. I faced the performance boards on several occasions and had a real grilling along with the officers, because we stood side by side. So can I understand why performance boards have been done away with?
Just to clarify for those new councillors that are here, because I'm aware that we've got about half the committee here today that are new councillors, the performance boards were a meeting that were held behind the scenes between cabinet lead members and looking at the general performance of everything within the council. I also fed into the performance dashboard, which is what we use to help with scrutiny. That dashboard was completely removed and stopped being used, and a new one is now being created. And so this comes down to the cancellation of the old dashboard, and I can update you on the dashboard in the June meeting for what will be worked on for here. And so that's what the performance boards were, and why it's really pertinent to scrutiny, as that fed through to there, as well as being part of where this transformation was actually coming from for the savings for 24-25.
Couple of points. So, first of all, Councillor Bryan was talking about savings beyond our future council, and the budget that's been approved for this next financial year includes target of sort of 10 million for our future council, but there's also other savings targets as well for non-our future council savings as well, including as well as income generation targets. So our future council isn't the only show in town. And I think how an administration receives its briefing is entirely down to that administration. So the point about whether we have a transformation and performance board, and whether it's, because once again, it's not an official meeting, it's not a committee, it's a board. So in some ways it undertakes similar role to what we were talking about earlier, about the cross-party steering group, similar sort of factors. The other point I'd make is we've got a new council plan with new targets following the new administration, and that's where the performance dashboard is being revised and updated and refreshed to hit that data, to provide that data.
It's not being revised and refreshed. They've removed the old dashboard and created a brand new one. It is brand new. All the old dashboard functionality in that whole programme is not in use. Because I asked if we could just, as scrutiny, just keep seeing it while it's being updated. It doesn't exist. It was removed. And I think the question was, who decided the removal of the performance board and the dashboard as part of it? Was that officer or political? Because we have no idea. And it's not about blame. It's finding out who made that decision.
I don't know. It's an incoming administration deciding how they want to receive their information. It wasn't, so it's just one of those things.
Ben, are you happy to take that away to find out if that was a political decision or not, and find out, because obviously you weren't the incoming at the time. So I think it'd be fine to find out that question and then let us know. Because I understand not all questions can be asked on the spot. That's why lines of inquiry is so important going forward. Thank you. Ray, do you want to carry on? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll try and keep some of these brief. Unfortunately, most of them come to you, Aidan, and I do apologise. Can I talk about the PwC report, which I've been trying to get a hold of, and it's impossible to get a hold of. I actually wrote to you to get a hold. I wrote to Matt Prosser to get a hold. Matt's not here, so I'm going to come back to you to get a copy of it, please, because I think it's important that we know what's in there, because we may be making the wrong comments based on not knowing. So I just want to get that made right. PwC were appointed in May. At what stage did... Now, bearing in mind the elections were in May, PwC were appointed in May. At what stage was it decided that we'd bring PwC in to do work?
In terms of getting a copy of the report, we'll share that with you.
Sorry, just to clarify, I was told categorically that there was not a report. They helped us write a report because I asked for it and you told me I could not see it because there wasn't one. So to be clear, I was told there was not a report categorically when I asked to see it, and I went all the way up the chain asking for it. So just to clarify, you're going to provide the report that categorically wasn't there.
So let me be sharper with my language. So PwC helped prepare a business case, the summary of which went to Cabinet and was approved by Cabinet. And we've got various more detailed versions of that report that are available for members should there's various detailed versions of that business case that will be available to members should they wish to receive it.
Was that not exactly what we asked for as scrutiny to prepare for the budget scrutiny? Because I remember having a very clear discussion where I said, I don't care if it's not a full report, I don't care if they helped us write it, can we just see what they were given for the Our Future Council going forward so we could have at least something to look at for budget scrutiny, and was told, no, you cannot because they did not write a report and wasn't there. So I'm a bit confused about that. And this does relate to Our Future Council, but Jonathan.
Chairman, I hope I'm going to get this right. So this is a point about timing. So that full business case was not available at the time of your meeting. It wasn't there. We were really working down to the wire in time for the Cabinet meeting. It's a report that we wanted to have available sooner, and I thought we'd had this conversation in the scrutiny meeting, that at the time of your meeting, that business case wasn't there in full. We had it in time to inform the Cabinet decision. It was a confidential background paper to the Cabinet report that all of you as members of the Council are entitled to see. But it wasn't there at the time that your committee met.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm just going to push back slightly and say that although it was shared to other members across party before our meeting then, on the day of the meeting beforehand, and I was very clear that we were not asking for the finalised report, but the plans and the work from PwC, and we were told no, we're not allowed it. But I won't keep pushing on that because now that report is out there. I just want to make it very clear because it's one of the reasons that I could not support the budget as a whole or sign off on it because we did not have it. I'm going to hijack something from here, if that's okay, Ray. As a point of clarity, I would like to ask Aidan, because of this year's, the savings not being met this year, will not affect full-time employees in the future because it was underpinned through guarantees on the budget instead. And that's what we said earlier as a response to Unison. Is this year's guaranteed on the budget instead? I'm looking for a nod or shake of the head. Is this year's Our Future Council, if those savings are not met, is that once more guaranteed by using general reserves? And I'm just looking for a yes or no on that one.
When you say this year, do you mean next year?
Sorry. So the savings that were meant to be found this year are the 24-25, which were not solved, and therefore have not had an impact on the future number of full-time equivalents we need to remove to make the whole, because it was covered by the budget, by the general reserves. The next £10 million one, that covered by reserves if it is not found?
So this year, we've set aside a specific 8.6 million reserve. So it's not a general reserve, it's a specific earmarked reserve. For next year, we haven't set aside a specific earmarked reserve. The general point is, if we overspent as a council, we'd have to draw on general reserves. But for this when we are expecting to deliver for next financial year.
So to clarify, this is not covered by earmarked reserves like the last one was. And that's the difference why if this one fails, like the last one, then it will affect full-time employees and the numbers of them because it's not. I'm trying to find the nuanced difference there because we've said to Unison that if it fails this year, it will affect full-time employees, but it failed last year, but that doesn't affect it, which doesn't quite seem right.
Yes, so correct. That an overspend would have to be funded by reserves, but it would mean that we have to, given that our reserves are getting tighter, then we'd be looking to reduce the number of full-time employees in order to deliver the savings, yes.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that helps clarify a bit because otherwise the two statements don't quite seem to match. So thank you for that. Councillor Bryan, any more? Yep.
Yep. Could I just get an answer as to who made the decision and when was that decision taken to bring in PwC? Because the timing looks quite strange. I can't think that the incoming administration would make that decision in the first few days of being in power. They would have gone and done their due diligence to see where we were, what we were doing, and how far had we got. So I'm trying to work out who made the decision to bring PwC in, and was that an officer decision?
Yes, so the decision was taken in May. It was an officer-based decision, and then as soon as we had a new administration in place, we briefed them on the decision that we had taken as officers, yes.
So I want to jump in on that. I love jumping on the back of Ray's points. He makes some great ones. So that was an officer decision to bring in an external group. What was the plan, like 2 months beforehand, to create the plan? Because we had great confidence in the plan to create the plan, and so the PwC, bringing PwC in clearly wasn't the plan. What was the plan before that to create the plan?
So I could draw ourselves back to the paper. So this is where we come into the 57 ideas. I've made reference in the paper. So we were originally going to make savings from looking in particular at the contact centre. The savings target had increased really significantly. We knew we wouldn't be able to do that by looking at the contact centre alone. So then we set out a challenging conversation across the organisation where we said, think the unthinkable. That came up with 57 ideas, which for various reasons are set out in the paper, wouldn't meet the savings time, so the savings required in the time required, because they were much more longer term. So at that point, as we're approaching May, we then approached PwC, well, we approached a series of, ran a competitive process to undertake some work to help us accelerate what we're trying to do, which was to make the organisation more efficient and better for our customers. So that's the timeline.
Sorry, Ray. Thank you. So I'm trying to work out from this, because I think there's actually quite an important point we're getting to here. So the plan to create a plan that was put forward at full council and was decided on by the budget was politically decided that that's what we would do. Then in May, it was, and I want to be clear on this, it was decided by officers not to follow that plan to create a plan, but instead do a different way to create the plan. That was decided by officers in May, which is fine. I don't think any wrongdoing was on there, but what was the political oversight of the choice to not follow the plan to create a plan that was signed off at full council and instead do a different way of doing it? What was the political oversight then with the decision making?
So let me, at the risk of repeating myself, and let me draw out a few points in the paper. So Councillor Suttle said earlier about the ambition of the previous administration, a more efficient council, remove the duplication, better technology, and make it a better experience. So that was the plan. And then we needed to develop that. So, but at the same time, we recognised very quickly that we weren't able to achieve the 12 million as it was at that point by doing those things alone. So we explored other areas, the 57 ideas. And by having gone through that process, we recognised that we weren't going to be able to hit the timeline. So the brief then, having decided to get some external support, the brief, the external support is, please can you help us develop a detailed plan to save, by this point, £8.6 million using technology by reducing, potentially identifying headcount reduction. So what we brought PwC in to do was to help us identify and deliver what the previous administration had wanted, and what PwC supported us to do was to move from a plan to have a plan into developing the actual plan, and that's what was approved by Cabinet in November as an outline, and then approved by Cabinet in January as a full business case. So your contention that sort of as an implication that officers had gone rogue, I'm arguing that officers found an expedient way to deliver what the previous administration had wanted, and by the time the new administration in post, we were able to describe the proposals and we carried on with them.
And thank you, and I appreciate that. The difference for me is that we've been basically saying that change was the reason we made 0 of 8.6 million, which is a massive difference. It wasn't a failure. It wasn't just that we didn't make it. It was a 0 of 8.6. And I'm trying to work out what we can make sure is in place in the future, that anything that is this high risk, high ticket an item has all of the checks and balances in place, that it can't happen again without having full knowledge and oversight of it. And I understand that it's a learning experience, because as Jonathan pointed out earlier, first time there's been a change of administration that this council's had to deal with. And work through. So it's a learning experience. It's not trying to blame or find rogue officers at all. It's just trying to find out what happened and finding out that was decided by officers, trying to keep within the spirit of what was decided at full council, in the context of knowing that there's a new spirit about coming in. And I'm just trying to find out the points, not pass blame. I have 2 people to speak, and then we're going to start drawing this up. Actually 3. We've got Ray to carry on. We've got Louis on this particular point or a different point. So we've got Ray on this point, Louis on this point, David on this point, then back to Ray for the next point. Super.
Again, I'm trying to understand the process that we've been through on this. I now understand that it was in that period, somewhere between Purdah and the election, that the decision was taken to bring in PwC. What I'm slightly confused about is, having asked PwC to come in and look at what was basically our work as the Conservative group, why were we not asked to explain to PwC what was the thinking behind what was our plan? It's as if you asked PwC to produce a report without knowing what was the theme behind it. I'm struggling a bit, and I'm sorry to labour this point, but I personally have been having a go at the current administration for not sharing with us the PwC report, and it now seems that they had little or no say in that appointment.
So, thank you. Just to clarify, the PwC helped to develop a business case, not a report. I sort of mentioned that earlier. The brief for PwC was based on the previous conversations, as I say, around technological investment, improving customer experience, understanding what staff are doing across our organisation, and looking for ways to optimise that, and looking for ways that we could join up our services that we've described and which are in the business case. So I'm not sure. So this was commissioned at a time, as we've just described, in May, where the previous administration were no longer in position, and we recognised that we needed to identify and get on and make these savings. So that was the context for commissioning PwC to help us.
I'm aware we've been on this item for about an hour and 40 minutes at this point. We do need to move on. There is a level. Are the committee feeling that they are getting, there's an outcome we've already got that we could put forward. Are the committee feeling that they understand what happened here? Or is this something that actually you think we are now confident in what happened, why it went wrong, and we've got everything in place to stop it? Or are you thinking we actually want to keep doing a bit further on this? Because if that is the case, then we could look at having a separate look into it, because I'm aware that we're asking Aidan to cover, and his team, a huge amount of different nuances and bits, and actually this might be something we want to do a separate thing for and work up some detailed lines of inquiry, unless we're all feeling very happy that we know what's under something now and actually we can move forward. So I'm looking for Ray, please come in on that.
Yeah, can I suggest, Chairman, that we wait now until we've got the PwC report that we can then look at, and we may want to scrutinise that, knowing the facts, rather than sort of speculating a little bit on what went right or what went wrong. Aidan, I've got to thank you for the way you've dealt with this. It hasn't been easy for you, but that's the job of scrutiny. So please take it in that way. But I've got to say, great work by the team so far. I look forward to the PwC report. And can I ask that it's the full report rather than an abridged edition, please? Sorry.
Business
Oh,
case.
the business case. Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan.
Chairman, as well as the point that it's a business case, what we're talking about is a working document that we have said that as far as the rest of the world is concerned, it's fine for you as councillors to have it, but we wouldn't want it to be out there for the rest of the world to look at the detail of that. It goes down to a lot of detail around teams that would enable teams of people, teams of staff within the council to be identified. So I think we'd need to have a conversation with you if you want to actually get into scrutiny of that document, whether you can actually do that in public without getting into issues of concern around identifying people.
Jonathan, you're correct. I would have suggested a closed inquiry day, where we would have a closed meeting where it was just the members of Scrutiny to begin with, and cabinet members as well to, as necessary, to go into that business report. But I think let's all see it first, because there's a good chance when we see it, we might not need to scrutinise it. So let's wait and look at that. Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, as the report, the business case, I just had to go in for calling at that. As is not what was in it is obviously not been carried out. And shouldn't it go to overview before it goes to scrutiny, really? And on the issue of PERDA, which has been brought up a few times, PERDA is outlined in the Local Government Act of 1986, I think. Jonathan will correct me if I'm wrong. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about PERDA. And I think the problem is officers and councillors, and I do feel sorry for officers because we're not really affected by it as councillors, but officers are. I think some officers, and I don't mean in this regard, but some officers in times have used that PERDA as an excuse for various things. And also I sometimes think officers, by misunderstanding PERDA, don't do things or are frightened to do things or feel that they're unable to do things with that overhanging them. We've had a recommendation to suggest that the council look at a transition period. Could we also look at recommending that officers, especially senior officers, are given a far more better understanding of PERDA, because I sometimes feel that it isn't fully understood. I mean, it's quite a vague thing in many ways.
So I'm just going to touch on two things there. PERDA, there's two sides to PERDA. There's three sides. there's the legal PERDA that is what they must, can and can't do. There's also the public perception of what PERDA is and the reputational damage to the council. And I think asking a recommendation to make sure that pre-elections all officers are up to date on what PERDA is something Jonathan says we'll do anyway, but we'll continue to do it and make sure it's in place. Jonathan, you want to disagree? Okay.
I'm not going to disagree. I'll add a third dimension to it, and in the same way that we'll all leave this meeting talking about a business case, not about a plan. I hope we'll all go away talking about pre-election periods rather than PERDA. But The third dimension to that pre-election period is the intensely practical one, because we do put out advice to officer colleagues about what the pre-election period means in law. But the practical point is actually from around March, we were struggling to get engagement from quite a large part of the outgoing council, because actually people's sights had shifted, and those who were standing for election were concentrating on, perhaps their minds were moving into getting themselves re-elected. Others weren't standing for election. And as a practical point, it was difficult to get business done, probably from around March onwards, with the formal pre-election period not starting until 18th of April.
Thank you, Jonathan. I just want to point out that actually it's funny that that's the officer's view, because the members that at the time were lead members and cabinet members' view was officers just refused to meet with us and wouldn't do half the work during that time. And isn't it funny how we've got the exact same outcome from two opposite perspectives? And I think that shows you the nuances of PERDA and how much people view it differently. And I think that's important. I just wanted to come back on that slightly. We've been doing this for almost 2 hours. I want to draw it together. If anyone wants to say something specifically, then they will. I just want to say that what I want to pull together is, going forward, we request the overview look at creating a policy to help support the transition periods at election times. Yep, going forward. We ask that, and I think it's already been alluded to, even though there's an informal group of people that have say in our future council, that officially we get the report that has been written by the business case by PwC, that all that paperwork comes to scrutiny and we can look at that and decide if it needs to then come. And we agree that we will have 6 monthly updates for our future council at scrutiny, like we do with the climate change emergency, because this is one of the biggest ticket items. And I think coming to us 6 monthly to scrutinise what's happened so far would be appropriate. I think that's the draw out from this. And I think the other thing is that we're going to have information about from Ben on when the exact decision was made and why if there was crossover there, if it was a decision made by the new incoming cabinet member or the officer, I think is the other thing that's coming from this as takeaways. Anyone else got any takeaways from this that we needed? Anyone feel there's something that's not covered by those that's so important they want to raise now? David Taylor, please do go for it. David, I'm very lenient.
It's just an observation, Chair, if you don't mind, to come in on this and listen to all of the conversations we had. We were fully aware within the last council, within the last 4 years, I think it was, what was coming our way, what reductions we had to do, what budgets we had to set, and the way going forward. We knew this, and we set it into stone. We also put together the budget for 24, 25 and 26 to make sure that we knew exactly what we were spending and what we were saving. So it's no shock. On that one there. The coming of the savings on the adult children's services, we knew the increases were going to be probably 25, 30%. We knew this was coming because we were told categorically. The savings, we had various departments in there to save the money, and they were actually delivering for us what savings we had for the future. So they were doing it. So there's a bit of today I'm sitting here thinking, we knew this, so why didn't we implement it? And we implemented it as even a new party coming in, didn't matter. We knew it. We were set in stone, 2 years, that's what's going to happen. And it hasn't happened. And I'm very, very, very surprised. And this PwC report, I wonder where this comes from as well. But thank you, Chair. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear a view from the ruling party that's been on here the whole time with us. And so I think if we're happy with that, I really want to draw this to a head now, that we have the recommendations. Are we happy that those have been recorded? Anthony, you happy with that? Yep. And everyone's happy that those are legal and valid recommendations and there's nothing crazy there? Jonathan?
Chairman, just a very monitoring officer, returning officer sort of point that you'll appreciate, that as monitoring officer, as interim returning officer, in supporting the idea that you should have a more managed approach to a transition of control, that's not officers making any political point or accepting that there would be necessarily any change of political administration next time. Of course, you can have a change of administration and it could be the same political party but different people.
Thank you, Jonathan. And yes, and actually that's the thing I tried to allude to earlier, that it's a change of the person doing it. And this policy, whilst making sure it captures the potential change, what it actually also covers is for situations where there's just a change for any reason. And I think that would be good. So we're all happy that this isn't officers saying, you know, it's going to change every 4 years. We might have the same people forever. Who knows? Okay, all happy with that? Everyone in agreement? Brilliant. In that case, we are going to have a 5-minute comfort break before we move to the next item, because I desperately need to make a phone call and use the facilities. So so we will have that. Please do stay online. We will be back. We'll resume at 12:25 for the next item, if that's okay. Thank you for that, everyone. I think most of us have managed to restore ourselves to our comfort, so to speak. We are waiting on one more member to get back. I believe he said he had to do something very quickly at the pharmacy. I think that's what he said. So we will just have a little bit of time waiting for him. I know he has read the report for the next item fully and will come in with questions on it. But I would like, while we await the return of that member, I'll pass over to Sean Kramer, who's probably going to give us a bit of a talk around setting the scene, as Aidan would say, for this particular item as Councillor O'Leary and Councillor Bartlett come back into the room. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully the mic's all working fine. So good afternoon, committee. I'm Sean Kramer, the Corporate Director for Finance and Commercial, and the author of this paper. I'd also like just quickly to introduce our advisor, Mark Swallow, who's online. So Mark's one of the directors at Arling Close, who those who've read our Treasury Management Strategy will be familiar that they're our Treasury Management advisors. So Mark and his colleagues advise us on a range of things on Treasury Management topic, which essentially is advice about how the council manages its money as best we can. Given Mark's expertise on the topic, we're obviously grateful that he's on hand to contribute to answering any specific technical questions or to provide further assurances should members wish those. For example, have your other clients done something similar? It might be the type of thing you may want to ask Mark about. And also thank Mark for his patience whilst we've gone through the prior agenda item, which I think took longer than everybody was expecting, but gave it a very thorough scrutiny. So turning to the paper, this paper is quite a technical paper and a very technical topic. So I'll do my best throughout the next however long to try and make it as simple as possible, and may use some lateral comparisons to try and put it to household terms to answer questions if possible. So there may be some grace needed there to try and make sure everybody can understand what's being proposed. So MRP, so this paper is Council's approach to minimum revenue position, referred to as MRP. And essentially where a council finances capital expenditure through debt, you must set aside an amount of money each year to essentially repay that debt. So the paper sets out that when MRP operates effectively, it should ensure that a local authority does not take on more debt than it can afford. And this risk of taking on too much debt is something which we've seen play out on a national level for a number of a small number of local authorities who have then received government intervention, with a most recent one being announced this week, essentially based on levels of debt and possible affordability. So therefore, when we're deciding on appraising any capital project, we must make sure it's affordable. And one of the things that we must make sure we're able to afford is the MRP charges in the budget. So the amount of MRP is calculated based on our capital finance requirement. So essentially, how much debt financed capital are we going to expend? So how much borrowing are we going to take on to buy or own assets or develop assets? There's a range of considerations when setting an MRP policy, and as part of reviewing said policy, and we've commissioned additional piece of work from Arling Close. I mentioned Mark is on the call, the Treasury Management Advisors. We've also sought legal advice from King's Counsel, which is referred in the paper as well. And we've also engaged our external auditors, Grant Thornton, who have been responsive and engaged with us throughout the kind of journey of considering this through to making through to options appraisal, through to the recommendations that come towards you. So to be clear, the recommendations in front of you which are proposed to go ahead to full council essentially can be summarised as better making a prudent charge, which considers two parts. The first one is the time frame over which we consider the useful economic life of an asset for which the debt is financing. And then the second one is moving to an annuity basis, which reflects the costs of the asset being spread in a different way over the lifetime of that asset, which in a very simplistic way looks to make sure that today's asset users and today's council taxpayers essentially aren't paying for an asset that will be used by people in the future. So the annuity method spreads that cost across the life of the asset rather than it being funded more upfront in a way that some of the other methods do. So the recommendations in front of you would apply to the 24-25 financial year, i.e. the current financial year, and would also apply to next financial year. And the recommendations set out ensure that the MRP charge continues to be prudent, but does not put any unnecessary pressure on the council's revenue budget. So that's my introduction. Happy to move to questions.
Thank you. This is where I would ask the Cabinet member if they wish to say anything. They're not present today, so we'll skip that bit. Go to non-members. Gary Suttle, please come on in.
If I could just ask a question about this. And I see you put in a report that you consider this to be low risk. But we'll be moving from ultra prudent to, let's call it prudent. And part of a fundamental ethos of this is about the actual assets and the period of time we're going to write them down. Is that correct? Yeah. And unless things have changed considerably in this council, I thought that one of the problems we had, particularly with the balance sheet and the value of those assets, was we had yet to assess them. And therefore, I ask, with what confidence are you giving to the value of those assets in order to move from an ultra-prudent position to a prudent, when in fact you have no basis to confidently say that those assets are worth that figure? Because, as far as I'm aware, and when I was in post, we were several hundred valuations and assessments behind. Therefore, whilst accepting that something I would certainly consider if maybe in the future, when the balance sheet and assets remain of an uncertain nature, I ask, how can you possibly consider this to be low risk?
Thanks, Gary. Councillor Suttle, quite a lot to unpack there. So you referenced prior year challenges around the asset valuation cycle. So members will have seen, as part of the latest local authority audit, one of the things was around change to how we treat different assets on our balance sheet. And we've had some more local challenges around the timeliness of those asset valuations. And that has been caught up, I suppose, and isn't mentioned in the latest audit report, which we saw from Grant Thornton. So some of that timeliness has now been caught up. In terms of assessing the kind of the valuation of the asset, so the MRP is based on the level of debt we're incurring rather than the value of the asset as such. And the useful economic life is assessed as part of our annual close down kind of year-end processes. So in moving to the 40-year useful economic life, we've taken a kind of category by category approach to our balance sheet, looking through to understand what's the average or the mean useful economic life that we have available, which leans towards moving to evidence is moving to a 40-year useful economic life to write down the debt over.
We'll just come back. You referenced other authorities getting into trouble in the past with paying them, and that was mainly because the valuations they relied upon eroded away in certain circumstances, such whether they bought shopping centres, etc., and were writing them down. In actual fact, because they're now vacant with nobody in the shopping and no shopping taking place, the valuation has dropped to stone, like a stone. So, and I know that you've caught up somewhat, but you still haven't caught up fully. This council still has outstanding valuations and assessments of those assets, and therefore, regardless of where you believe we are now, I still believe that the assessment in the report of this being low risk is certainly medium, because there remain a level of undefined valuations. You may well find significant expenditure, for example, in those valuations, such as we found in the past in some of, say, the hotels in Weymouth, where in actual fact, rather than asset, they turned out to be a liability. Those have not yet been completed. And regardless of a principle of 20 to 40, you still have to rely on the asset value to write it down. Therefore, the basis of your asset devaluation could be incorrect. And therefore, I cannot believe that this remains of a low risk, depending on how many valuations you haven't done, I suppose, or haven't been done. So I suppose my question is, what element is still to be done? What value of that in relation to the total asset value? I mean, if it's only 5% still to do, then I would agree with you it's low risk. But if in fact it's more like 40% and you don't actually know what they're worth, then this would be more of a non-prudent, non-low risk.
And yes, so just to try and be clear, what the MRP is writing down is the debt taken on, not the asset valuation. So come point of clarity.
Sorry, I should have referenced the assets with debt as opposed to non-debt, because this is what this is about.
Yes, and so in the scenario, so what we're doing is the council saying we've borrowed a sum of money to finance, to take on debt. In the scenario where the asset valuation drops, the issue there is that you can't. One option might be that you sell that asset to pay off the debt. The basis for doing an MRP is to try and write down that debt, so you aren't reliant on doing that. And some of the issues that other authorities have had is that they've not made a prudent MRP charge, and therefore when the asset value has dropped, they've kind of not got an asset to sell to cover the debt, and they've not put any money aside to pay off the debt. So, but both things are true. And where people took investment properties, the basis for not putting money aside was this is an investment in an asset which is going to grow in value, and therefore we don't need to set money aside to write down the debt associated with that asset, because we'll just sell it in 10 years' time and repay the debt. So so the low risk element here is that we are setting aside money to fully finance the debt over the 40 years. So it doesn't necessarily matter what the asset value is, because we've put the money aside year on year to repay the debt. I think in household terms, it would almost be similar to an offset mortgage. I don't have one of those, so I can't say, but where you kind of have a house which you have debt against and you put money to one side and the two should have the equal value, but you have the offset money to repay the debt rather than rely on selling the house to repay the debt.
I think just to put it in a more clear analogy, it's basically we have X debt, which we intend to pay over 20 years. We are looking at refinancing the debt to pay it over 40 years instead. That's basically what this is, isn't it?
Well, we're not refinancing it, but we are saying that we are going to repay it over. We're going to extend the write down over 40 years. So we're not taking out new debt as such, but we're just changing the period of which we write it down, and that's on the basis that the annuity method, or the 40 years, is based on the actual useful economic life of the asset. So if we write something down over 25 years, the argument is you're overcharging the 25 years of use of that asset, and the last 15 years would almost be free. So actually the service users at a community centre, for example, for the last 15 years, in theory, have a superficially reduced charge. But if you think you're going to use it for 40 years, you should charge it over 40 years.
And the opposite when it's the other way around, and we only use it for 5 years rather than 40. To be clear, it burns out both sides.
Yes. So the useful economic life is assessed on an asset class by asset class basis. So plant and machinery like refuse vehicles, etc., are written down over a much shorter period, recognising that they might only be used for kind of 5 to 10 years. Whereas if we build something brand new, we would expect that building to be there for kind of 40 to 50 years.
We have such a low number of people that aren't on the committee and apologies from the committee. I'm going to take it in the order the hands have gone up rather than split it into members, non-members. So currently I have Councillor Louis first, then I have Neil, and then I have Andrew Parry, and then I have Craig, and then I have David, Vey, at some point, I'm just going to put you on the list because you're going to want to say something. And so we're aware that we are going to go through, and that's everybody in the room. So everyone's going to speak, and then after everyone's spoken, we'll look at if everyone wants more questions afterwards. Louis.
Thank you, Councillor Lacey-Clark. Keeping the procedure correct. Firstly, I'd like to ask where the Cabinet Member for Finance is, because I think there are some questions here that he should be asking that I don't feel can be directed towards an officer. The old saying on Littlemore we have is, if it seems too good to be true, then it's normally a fix. This is a bit more expletives in it normally, but I'm just concerned and confused as why we're rushing into this. And part of me thinks, is it just because it's been discovered that we could do this and the financial position is worse than we anticipated, or is it because central government planned to ban this type of thing being able to be carried out in April, is what I was led to believe. So surely if it was such a good move and a good thing to do, it would have been done earlier, considering we've just set a budget and it should have really been brought in at that point as opposed to rushing it in now. So therefore, what I'd like to ask, was that an officer decision or was that a decision by the Cabinet Member? But obviously I can't ask the Cabinet Member that because he's not here. And the other thing I want to say is, if it's being banned in April, surely, well, I obviously don't support a lot of things this government is doing, there must be a reason somewhat behind it. So if it's being banned in April, why is it being banned? Because surely they're not going to ban it if it's a good thing. And I'm always a bit iffy about trying to expand debt payment off. I think if you've got debts, you should try, and that's why I was brought up, you should try and pay them off sooner rather than later, as it were. So those are my concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Leary. Good questions. I just wanted to be something, I believe the banning retroactively changing the time it's paid off on. It wouldn't change the fact that anything a council now adds to it could still be paid off on 40 years. They're not banning off that side to it. I believe they're banning changing it on stuff you've already got. I believe that's the case. I'll let Sean come in on the rest of it.
Thanks. Yeah. So just again, a really technical paper. So I'm glad we're getting into the nuts and bolts of it. So that's really great evidence of scrutinising this paper, right? So the two things. One is we plan to change it for 24-25. That has to happen in the year in which it relates to. You cannot apply it retrospectively. And there's also currently the legislation doesn't allow you to apply it to a retrospective financial year either, because again, there were some instances where local authorities were saying, I'm going to change my MRP policy in this year, and then I'm going to recover last year's MRP as well. So you were making like double whammy on the savings, which to quote, that was too good to be true. And that loophole was closed in the current regulations. The regulations that change from the 1st of April has been picked up and make the change that you cannot make a change to MRP for solely financial reasons. And as we've outlined, this is not solely for financial reasons. So for 25-26, we could make that change in the 25-26 year, but given that we're coming to a full council to change it for in year for 24-25, it seems best use of everybody's time to make the policy changes in one hit rather than wait till 25-26, because again, we would then face the criticism of, why didn't you change this before the start of the financial year? Why have you changed it in year? What are you trying to cover up, etc., which is perhaps where some of the questions might go. So to be clear, we would be able to make the change to we believe we would be able to make the change to 25-26 in year, because both sets of legislation allow you to make a change in year and you report that to the next available council meeting. But what we're doing here is changing the in year 24-25 and preemptively changing 25-26. There's nothing in the regulations from the 1st of April that would suggest we weren't able to make these changes on the basis that we're not doing it solely for financial gain.
I like to push back on things, so I'm going to do a little bit of pushback. Feel free to push back against me. I'm really interested to find out what the reasons are that aren't financial, because I've already seen the financial reasons. So that would be interesting to find. And also, I agree completely on the idea of good governance and the fact that these changes should be made at full council and should be made once. However, this particular system has asked to come to scrutiny in an emergency situation, has bypassed audit and governance in the way it normally would, and we're having to call a special full council in order to ratify it, all of which strike me as knee-jerk reaction as opposed to good governance. So I want to push back on that idea of making the decision once. Jonathan wants to come in, probably to say that it shouldn't have come to audit and governance. I'm guessing that's what he's going to say. Go for it, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely, Chairman. This would not normally go to audit and governance. If this had been dealt with through the regular budget setting, regular budget process, then it would have come to you back in, what would it be, November, December time at your budget scrutiny meeting, and then recommended into full council. And my understanding is this is not a knee-jerk reaction. This is our external auditors, our new external auditors, and it's part of that. Aidan's going to tell me and Sean will tell me I've got the frequency wrong, but I think they change over every 4 years. But our new external auditors identifying that we're being overly prudent, that there is something that's worth exploring here, but they've told us that after the normal budget setting, so not in time for you to do that as part of the budget in February. And then we've been to advisors, and our advisors have said, yes, that's right, you are excessively prudent, and you've got supporting the paper in front of you, a detailed piece of work and professional advice from them. So it's not a knee-jerk, it's not something that we're sort of rushing to without advice. Principles for good decision-making, you make your decisions with the benefit first of professional advice. And if we'd come forward without that professional advice, I would be saying to you, that's not complying with the principles for good decision-making.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll come back on that later after everyone else has spoken. Louis.
The question I really want to get to the bottom of is obviously the key word in that was advice. Advice has been given. I think advice that we're too prudent is not advice I would particularly heed. I don't think we can be too prudent given the financial situation we are in as a council. Personally, that's my opinion as elected member. I want to, the advice was given. This has been rushed through, in my opinion. In terms from an elected member position, we're calling a special full council on the top of cabinet, which I believe would then stifle cabinet discussion on Tuesday because people will be rushing through agenda items to get to full council, to which it will be assumed that this will be rubber stamped, is what the impression I'm getting, as like I say, the cabinet member for finance isn't here. While I don't agree that it should have gone to audit and governance, I find it odd that we're scrutinising a policy that's not been approved by council yet. I find it incredibly odd. Surely this should have gone to overview. I have no idea why this is at scrutiny. How can we scrutinise something that isn't taking place or hasn't taken place? Which once again reiterates the fact, in my opinion, that this is being rushed through, likely because of the changes in April, partly because of changes in April. And I don't know the other reasons because, like I keep reiterating, the cabinet member responsible isn't here.
So, Louis, I've got a couple of bits I want to clarify there. Councillor O'Leary. The cabinet member's not here because quite often we are looking for detail, not cabinet. And so I have sort of set that out a bit. However, I am surprised because most cabinet members do turn up when there's something on here, but it is not a prerequisite and we haven't specifically requested him to come. Secondly, this has come because whilst we have overview looking forward, scrutiny looking backwards in theory, with budget, it's different. And when it's budget, it does go to scrutiny. And because this is a change of the budget, they asked for it to come here. I'm sure it also was expedient for the fact that it happened to meet the timeline, if it comes here, to be able to call an emergency meeting just before the time we're not allowed to do this anymore. I'm sure that's an expedient coincidence. But yes, Councillor, please do go back on the rest of the question.
Ask one, and it was said that this isn't a financial reason behind it, but 4.2 to implication says a revenue saving of 6 million. Surely that's a financial decision and will play a large factor in this coming forward because 6 million in terms of our current budget overspend is quite a large amount of money.
So I think you've covered why it's come to scrutiny. Obviously, it could go straight through to full council, but there was a recognition, as you set out, that typically if we make something as a change ahead of the financial year, it comes through scrutiny before going to full council. So it's to provide this opportunity for debate ahead of full council. I believe the cabinet member's not here because I believe he's on holiday. So and obviously this came through relatively late, so I don't think he perhaps opted to cancel his holiday to come to the meeting. I'm not sure whether that would be normal or not. In terms of the why is it financial or not? Well, what you're being asked to approve is the policy. So it's not financial that you're being asked to change it to 40 years, and it's not financial that you're being asked to change it to an annuity basis. That's on the basis of being more prudent and not overcharging the revenue budget. The implications of that policy have clearly a financial implication, but it's horse before cart type thing. We're not saying you should make this change to release those savings. We're saying you should make this change because it better reflects the useful economic life of the assets, and therefore the period in which you should write down the debt to finance those assets or finance that capital expenditure and borrowing, and that the annuity method is a more prudent way to charge that over a 40-year life. So the outcome is still the same, that over 40 years the debt is fully provided for. The implications are financial, and obviously it's difficult to say this paper's not financial because it clearly has a financial implication, but the basis for changing the policy is not led by the saving that's achieved.
Thank you for that clarity. And Councillor, we'll come back to you, but I'm going to go because everybody else as well. Neil, please do come in.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Neil, I think Egerton Ward. I'm touching on the same issue, really. I mean, looking at this, I can understand why it's being couched in terms of prudence. I suppose I'm looking at it thinking more, actually, this is, and I totally understand what Sean is saying, this is actually related much more directly to useful economic life. And I guess my question, therefore, is very focused in relation to that switch from 25 years to 40 years. We're essentially saying that there are classes, a class or classes of assets that we were planning on making use of for 25 years. And now suddenly we're saying, actually, no, we can hang on to them for 40 years. So I guess I'd like to understand how did we get it wrong when we presumed the assets were going to be held for 25 years and suddenly we can hang on to them for 40? If I were to buy a car and think I was going to hang on to it for 5 years, and someone said to me after 5 years it's going to fall to bits, and then I suddenly say, oh, well, actually, I'm going to hang on to it for 10, I think people would be quite justified in asking me, is that actually achievable? So I'd like to understand the useful economic life bit. And as a kind of a follow-up as well, I guess I'd like to understand the rationale, really. Normally, you would apply a straight line method throughout or an annuity rate throughout for what apparently are similar asset class types. And yet here we're proposing, previously we've had a straight line consistency. We're now saying for one set of assets, post-2008, we're going to do it on an annuity basis, but for everything pre-2008, it's going to be a straight line. So I'd like to understand the justification for how that's come about. Thanks.
So in terms of how do the useful economic lives apply to the policy, so that's part of what's been picked up as part of our external audit and in conversations with our Treasury Management advisors, that actually the approach to MRP that was being taken for the pre-2008 assets was based on a 4%, which is equivalent to writing it down over 25 years. And they've identified that that is the ultra-prudent approach, and therefore, actually, those assets already have a useful economic life of averaging 40 years, and therefore, you are writing down the debt over 25 years for a asset which was financed by that debt, which you expect to use for 40 years. So they're kind of flagging them as like a discrepancy between the MRP policy and our useful economic life, and that change moves them to be consistent rather than says, actually, we thought we were going to use this thing for 20 years and actually we're going to eke it out for another 20, for example. So we're not saying that we've got something which, in the car example, that's fallen to bits and we're going to persevere with it for longer. We're saying we already anticipated using it for that length of time. And also the pre-2008 method of a 4% reducing balance doesn't clear the debt over time, because the basis of a reducing balance means you chip away at the balance each time rather than clear the entire debt. So you never fully finance it, whereas an annuity method allows you to finance it over the whole life. So there's a debt curve I can share. Perhaps we can add it to the council paper's been published, but I can share with committee members to show how that is brought down over time and fully financed. In terms of the basis for changing from the annuity to the straight line method, so everyone is picking up on that ultra prudent, prudent, not prudent, and kind of where we are on that spectrum. So one of the ways to keep the weighting on the prudent side is to make the change to the post-2008, move to annuity basis, but keep it as straight line for pre-2008. That balances the overall MRP charge to make sure it's prudent for the totality of the debt as well as the individual items.
So, councillors, I'm going to now seek a proposal, which I'm going to do from the chair, that we extend this meeting. We need to be aware that actually there's another group coming in at 2. And this is sadly due to the delays, but we've now done 3 hours in 4 minutes' time. So I would like to propose from the chair that we extend the meeting for an additional 45 minutes. Louis is seconding or going against it? Councillor Louis O'Leary from the Littlemore and Preston ward is seconding that. All those in favour of extending it? Excellent, we'll carry on. So I just want to ask a question before we go back to Neil. Can I have assurance that every single asset that we are saying is moving from 25 years to 40 years that we currently hold has been re-inspected to make sure it will be of use for the 40 years, rather than just having an assumption that it should last 40?
So yes, the use, yes, as part of the close down period, we value all our assets on the various cycles. So investment assets are valued every year. Non-investment assets are valued, I think, on a 3 yearly cycle. So yes, everything is expected to be up to date for the 24-25 year. We've got a plan in place to make sure everything is valued for as we kind of close out this year.
Sorry, I'm trying to clarify this, but there's stuff you're asking for recommendation to go forward, that a whole bunch of assets are reclassified to 40 year from 25. And are those specific assets, obviously they're all listed somewhere as specific items, have they all been checked that they will last the additional 15 years? Because some of them might be on 24 of those 25 years. Some of them might be on 1 year of those 25. And that's what I'm trying to make sure is that someone has physically checked that those assets are going to last 40, rather than assuming they will.
Yeah, so essentially that's what's done as part of the valuation process. And as you say, we're not saying that everything is currently at year 16 and we're going to restart the clock. As you say, different assets will already be at age 22 or age 5, depending on how long ago the assets. But again, to be clear, this is the life of the debt that we're extending, not the asset. So we're not making any changes to the asset, the useful economic life of the assets held on our balance sheet. We are making a change to the time period over which we refinance the debt, which is based on the useful economic life, but we're not saying we're going to extend the useful economic life beyond what it already is.
Thank you. So the economic life isn't being changed. The useful economic life, which we assume are 25 years currently, isn't being changed. We're just changing how long we pay the debt off for, is what you've just said. So it is purely financial. It's not about being relational to the economic, the useful economic life of the item, because that's not changing. That was set at 25 is staying at 25, yeah?
Yes, we're not changing the useful. This paper does not set out a change to the asset life.
Excellent, thank you very much. That makes my question null and void, because we're not doing that. Neil, please carry on.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I think that's helpful. I understand how that works. I guess the other question I had was in relation to the forecast improvements. I see, obviously, there's a lot of assumptions in there. One of the key assumptions that looks like driving that, the improvement in the situation in relation to the hit that we're taking is interest rates. And I just wondered if they'd been, how that had been modelled, had been stress tested to just see whether we've looked at, actually, or how sensitive it is to interest rate movements, and whether actually a very small movement in interest rates would have a disproportionate impact on the change that we're looking to make.
So as part of calculating this, we use annuity rates, and so this might be a question to bring Mark Swallow in online to talk a little bit about the annuity basis. But essentially, the modelling that we've done over 40 years has an assumption about what the annuity rates will be for that 40-year period, which is based on the tables and the analysis that Mark and his colleagues produce. In addition to, and again, they advise on all aspects of interest rates in terms of bank rates, etc., as well as the annuity rates as well. So Mark may wish to say a little bit about how they stress test that as it goes out over 40 years.
Fantastic, thank you. And for anyone that wasn't in the room beforehand, people that joined us online, this is us testing to see if online compatibility is now hearable within the chamber, because some of us have to half lip read as well. And so we're going to try it. If it doesn't work, then Mark will have to send comments through instead.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So the annuity rates that we've used when modelling, the MRP guidance suggests that you use an an annuity rate at the point in time that you start applying MRP to that particular part of the CFR, the capital financing requirements. So the savings that have been identified are based on a constant annuity rate applied to the outstanding capital finance requirement that's being looked at here. So we're not going to be, the MRP will not be reassessed each year. The annuity rate that's been applied was the annuity rate, the Public Works Loan Board annuity rate for 40-year loan, available on the 2nd of April 2024. The 2nd of April being the first day of the financial year, because the 1st of April was Easter Monday, I believe. So that rate that's being used to calculate the annuity for this year and further years will stay constant. Any further spend in future years will be subject to the annuity rate applicable at the time that spend is undertaken and funded by borrowing. So changes to future annuity rates will not impact any of the savings that have been identified in this paper. It will impact for future years' charges, but none of the savings that have been identified to date. Hopefully that answers the question.
So thank you, Mark. I could hear what you were saying, but I found it very challenging. I don't know if that's a me issue. Today we'll carry on with you attending online for this, because I don't think I'll have many questions to ask you myself. But I think actually the quality is so dependent on the quality of the microphone, the lighting in the room. Because, for example, I can't see your lips very well, so it's very hard for me to half lip read to get understanding as well. And it's not a problem on you, so thank you for trying, and we'll keep you talking that way. I'm going to ask, did it answer your question, Neil?
I'm not entirely sure it did. I appreciate the fact, obviously, yep, the annuity rates that we used are the ones that are set out at the time the setup is set up, for want of a better way of putting it. I'm just not sure whether it answered my question around stress testing in relation to, what if interest rates suddenly skyrocketed? We're saying that at the moment, we would look to be in a net positive situation until 2041 to 2054, I think, it said in the report. And I guess my question is, well, what if interest rates suddenly skyrocketed to 10, 15%? What does that then do to the timescale in which we accrue benefits? Presumably it drops back significantly. And I guess I'm still a bit vague about how that's been tested, just to see whether this is actually something that brings the benefits that we're expecting it to bring?
So if I set off on an answer, and then Mark may come in to talk about predicted annuity rates as they change going forward. So the annuity rate is set and stays constant. So so if you imagine it as each year when you take out you buy a new house and take out a mortgage, you lock in your mortgage at that point. So the debt on the debt we're looking to refinance on the tables at the moment is locked in for the 40 years. It would only be any new debt that was taken on, which would then be subject to a change in interest rates. So because you would charge MRP kind of based on the debt from the previous year. So the on the table, if I just it shows that the capital financing requirement was £369.6 million. The annuity rate for that is locked in. So then so for 25-26, our capital programme is budgeted to spend north of 130 something million, of which a portion of, I think about 80 or so million of that is funded through debt. So that debt financing for 25-26 would then be given an annuity rate the following year to spread it out across the 40 years. So it would only be the new portion of debt that was exposed to changes in interest rates, not the pre-existing debt. So in the scenario of a 370 million existing interest rate locked in, and then you take on 80 million of new financing, the proportion of debt exposed to the interest rate is small. Therefore, the volatility you might see is also small. And then we, as part of setting the budget each year, we take a view on capital financing costs for the council. So we would have the opportunity, if interest rates did change dramatically, we would have the opportunity as part of setting the budget to account for, actually, we need to increase our MRP budget by £500,000 because interest rates have changed over the last year, and we think we're going to be exposed to that going forward. But again, it would only be on the new debt taken out, not the existing one.
I think that was a pretty good answer. Are you happy with that? Yep.
I am, thanks, Chair. I did just have one other quick question. Sorry to bore everyone, but I notice in 4.8 it says that the Council's external auditors, Grant Thornton, have reviewed this, but the plan is to hold an amount in an earmarked reserve until their audit has been completed next year. I'm just wondering, just on the basis of prudence, presumably if we're holding an amount in an earmarked reserve, I wonder what our view of the likelihood of Grant Thornton taking a different view from us at a later date is. Remote, possible or probable, I think, are the options from an accounting perspective. So I just wondered if I could get a sense on that as well.
So if the question is what's the probability of auditors taking a remote, probable or possible different opinion to us, well, that is always a risk that we face as we go through the external audit process. And those of you that are on the Audit and Governance Committee will see that there are a number of findings that the auditors pick up each year and ask us to make a change to the accounts that we've done. So it's always possible that they will raise a different view on the prudence for this. And as a rule of, I wouldn't want to speak for the auditors, but as a rule of thumb, the external auditors look for what level the MRP is charged at in relation to the total capital financing requirement. And so the paper sets out that our capital MRP is about 1.4% for 24-25. And over time, that rises to in excess of 3% in 42-43. In the informal conversations with Grant Thornton, they've said that when an MRP charge is less than 2%, they kind of ask more questions, and they would essentially look to explore how we've assessed that, is it prudent, et cetera, et cetera. So it's likely that Grant Thornton will want to understand more about that. We've shared with them our current working papers that evidence the move to writing down the debt over 40 years. And also they recognise that the annuity method is permittable within the existing and soon to be changed guidance. So there's no concerns they've raised at the moment. But as ever, they will. The lead partner was clear to kind of reserve the right to to change that opinion at any stage whilst the audit is ongoing and hasn't concluded. So the approach for the council is to be ultra prudent and make the saving and then hold on to it. So i.e. don't go and spend it on something just in case we have to then reverse that out, and then that would be unfortunate in the future. But if that was to happen, sorry.
Can I just say, sorry, we've only got 35 minutes. We're going to have to be a bit more succinct in answers. And I think the question was, do you believe that it's going to be moderate, possible, probable? And you've said it's probable they will question it and talk further on it, so we're marking it, but the actual decision will be different and it's more about us explaining it to them. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yes, that all good, thanks, Chair.
Next person is Andrew Parry.
Thank you, Chair. This, I believe, is the third budget U-turn that we've seen in a short period of time after the, let's see, nighttime parking fees, the planned cuts to the youth grant, and now this. I mean, last time I saw this many U-turns done at this speed, Top Gear was still on television. So no wonder the Cabinet member has decided to be absent from the chamber today. And I feel sorry for the officers who've been sent down to take the heat for him on this matter. However, there's a couple of things I want to touch on. One is actually a broader sense across the picture of local government finances, and particularly at the town and parish level, because I know when I floated this idea past my town and parish, they said, hang on a minute, we never write down any assets. They arrive on our balance sheet and they stay there until the day they're disposed of. So I think we need to understand that narrative to the wider audience that might be looking at this and understanding why an upper tier authority has these powers to determine lines of depreciation. The other matter I have to turn to is I haven't heard anything so far that suggested that this isn't purely a financial matter, and the legislation is changing to prevent this policy becoming purely about solely financial. And that is the concern. It seems to be wanting to be exercised for political expedience to provide £6 million worth of revenue into the current budget year, possibly because things like the Our Future Council Plan could have a bumpy year. We don't know how that's going to play out yet. And if 6 million might cushion that blow. And how often have we sat in this chamber or in other committee rooms and discussed the fact that we are dealing with an inherited position of decisions that were made 25 years ago or so about a particular thing that is really in dire straits today? And isn't part of our duty as councillors to ensure that actually good governance, so that when we are all here in 2050 and the likes of Councillor O'Leary, our leader of the council, he's got a solid platform to be able to produce what the residents of Dorset require at that time, rather than having to sweep up the mistakes of 2025. So what I'd like to understand, please, and let's be honest about it, this is being done because there is a deadline with government. It's a solely financial position that we're looking to achieve here, and it provides some jam for today, but goodness me, we could have some problems tomorrow.
I think the monitoring officer's indicating with his eyes.
So, Chairman, my view, sitting back from this, there was a bit about politics at the beginning, but I don't think this is about anyone being involved in a U-turn on a budget or anything like that. I follow the order in which things have happened, and your external auditors have come forward and have said that the Council's current position on write-down appears to be overly prudent, and it is an area that you should look at. They came forward and said that at a particular time. This prompted colleagues to speak to our external advisors to seek their advice, and they have come forward with advice which suggests that the approach is excessively prudent. Changing that excessively prudent approach has a financial consequence, but this is not colleagues coming forward with a proposal to say, here's a way of finding £6 million. This is our advisors saying there's an overly prudent approach which has a financial consequence, but it is not financially driven.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think you've made the point well there. I think what we're trying to draw from this is the question of, if this was a recommendation, this was a recommendation that's come about from our auditors and they've looked at it and the advice from them. Normally, that would then feed into being changed for the next financial year going forward and looking at changing going forward, and which would be absolutely in line with the current ruling and the ruling that's going to come out, or the rules are going to come out. The difference here is this has caused an emergency council meeting, and that is unusual to do, and it costs the council. Therefore, it appears to all of us as a politically motivated expedience method. And what we're asking for is, what are the benefits apart from the financial, which is a happy benefit we're not planning on? Why are we doing it otherwise? Why would we be any less prudent? Being ultra prudent's better. We're choosing to downgrade our prudency. What's the benefit that we're getting that isn't financial?
Thank you. So, Aidan Dunn, Section 151 officer. I think, as Sean's outlined, what we're trying to do here is align the sort of use of resources so that today's taxpayer benefits from today's use of resources. And so what we're describing at the moment, by having a short life cycle for the a useful economic life for the assets, is what we're describing is that we use the assets a lot longer than we're financed for, and therefore taxpayers aren't getting a fair reflection of the resources. So this is about aligning use of resources so that you kind of effectively, from a council perspective, pay for what you use.
So going forward, that's correct. But also, Sean has said we are not looking at the expected financial life cycle use of a building. We're not looking at the assets. We're not changing them. So that doesn't come into this calculation. This is purely changing I'm talking about the changing for this financial year. Going forward, I agree with you, and that is a positive. It is the positive for doing it on the previous stuff. There is only financial. I think that's what we're trying to get to. What is the benefit of doing that other than financial?
So I suppose, as we try to say, it's difficult, right, to say that this isn't a financial thing because it's a policy which results in a charge. So it would be difficult to say it's not a financial. But what the guidance prohibits you from, basically, in very simple terms, the guidance prohibits you from saying, I'm going to change my policy to make a saving, and I'm not really paying attention to whether or not it's prudent. I'm not really paying any attention to whether or not the debt has any correlation to the life of the asset. What we're saying is we are changing our policy to make sure that the debt is written down over the same period as we plan to use the asset for, which is more prudent and better reflects the use of that resource over the expected time, and therefore is fairer to the taxpayers that consume that asset. But it is financial because it ends in a charge. But it's not. We're not saying we're only doing it to make a saving. We're doing it to be more prudent. The regulations stop people doing the opposite and saying we're just going to write it down.
So to be clear, what you're saying is going forward, there is other good reasons for the actual lifespan of them, for being fair to the taxpayer. But what you're saying is you cannot state a reason why there's any reason other than financial for changing the current stuff that we're extending. That is the difference here, is you're listing reasons for the future stuff, not this stuff. Please do correct me.
What I'm saying is that so the MRP charge this year would be £11 million. So that would be a charge to the current taxpayer of £11 million for an asset. And we're saying, based on to finance the debt that was used to finance an asset. So we're saying that is essentially overcharging today's taxpayer. So the current policy should change. So it's a benefit in the future, but it's a disbenefit in the future, because those people that would use the asset for years 26 to 40 would currently essentially have no charge. So they would get the asset for free because today's taxpayer paid £11 million a year, not 5.
Absolutely. And you've also said you are not looking at the life cycle of these assets and you're not checking that they are correct. So we're not changing the lifestyle of the asset. The lifestyle of the asset is the asset. When it was bought and sold by whatever political manifesto did it at the time, it was agreed over the 25 years. We're now saying that in the future, we want to change it so those assets are linked to their actual usable lifespan. Fantastic idea. I think most of us in here support that. 40 years, great. But what I'm hearing is I'm not hearing anything about what the benefit is from adding this burden to further time to free it up now. Because we're not rebasing and rejudging how long those assets are going to last to link them, we're just changing them. And I think that actually I've not been convinced of a single actual valid benefit to the residents of Dorset for us changing this, other than it adding a bigger burden later on. And that might not be for 20 years, but it is adding that on. And I think that's very clear. But either I'll go to that question afterwards, but we need really succinct answers. Craig, Andrew, do you want to come back in, or can I go to Craig?
Just very briefly, so on the clarity of this, the £6 million that you estimate you can achieve in the incoming financial year, or this financial 25-26 financial year, is based on assets that is a best guess, because it is based on assets that may not have been audited or inspected to ensure that they are of merchantable quality to last the 40-year term. Have I understood that correctly?
No, the debt is the debt which is moving over 40 years, and we do value all our assets as part of closing down the accounts on a cycle based on the asset. So no, we're not saying we are extending the debt on assets we don't understand. That wouldn't be something which the Section 151 officer or I as his deputy would bring forward, and is the type of thing which has caused challenges elsewhere. So we are not saying that.
So it's nothing to do with the lifetime of the asset, it's purely to do with the paying back of the debt.
Well, the two are inextricably linked, right? But this is the technicalities, right? So the debt is taken over, and at the moment we write the debt down. So on the pre-2008, it's written down at 4%. So we write that debt down over a 25-year period. But what we're saying is that debt was financing assets which have an average useful economic life of 40 years. So what is the reason we are writing down the debt for that asset over 25 years, but we expect to use it for 40 years? So we're moving the debt right down. We're not changing anything about assets.
Absolutely, and that's why going forward makes sense. Buy an asset, judge how long it will last, write down over that period. But you're saying you have not gone and checked the assets that are being changed from 25 years to 40 years to make sure they are still there and valuable. I asked the question earlier and you said you hadn't. So we don't need to go through that again. Sorry, Eddie's looking like that's wrong, but earlier on you did say you hadn't gone and checked all the assets, so we'll check.
I said that we value the assets on an evaluation cycle as part of the close down. So have we valued every single asset every year? We aren't required to do that. And again, we are not changing the asset, we're changing the debt.
And that's not the question I asked, the statement I made. I asked if we had been and inspected the assets to see if they would last 40 years. I'm not asking about the valuation of what it's currently worth. I'm asking, you're saying the asset is used for 40 years, but paid over 25. Yeah, that's the argument about us making sure it's paid over the whole time. I'm saying if we're saying we thought it would only last 25 years, or we're paying it for, have we gone and checked they actually are still there and actually are still an asset and actually are not a liability, as can happen with some buildings, particularly listed ones? And that's what I was asking, and that's not the valuations, it's the checking. And I think that's a bit that hasn't been done. And I'm not trying to catch everybody out here, because I think going forward, what you're planning is brilliant. Makes really good sense for new assets. Write them down over their life cycle. But don't change stuff if we haven't checked that it's definitely there, because that's just adding risk factors we don't need. And as someone that was involved with the changeover from the old council to the new one, we didn't even know what assets we had fully. It took us a long time to find all the assets and find all the lists and put them all in. And I'm sure we heard earlier we're hundreds behind in checking the valuations. We've caught up slightly. I would be uncomfortable to think we've caught up fully at that time. And so I'm trying to make that point really clear and why I'm so against this, but not going forward. Changing it going forward, brilliant admin plan. Absolutely support. So, Craig, you've been waiting for a long time.
Thank you, Chair. Just because we had a break, Councillor Craig Monks, Bedminster Ward. I'll keep my contribution as short as I can. I totally agree with Councillor Perry's previous comments, and your last few comments, I completely agree with those as well. I think as the debate's gone on, I've become more anxious around this substance, and I understand the officer's position. I understand their valiant efforts at explaining it, but to me, this does sound rushed. It does sound like something that's come to us and will go through the process very quickly. And I think moving away from a level of prudence is a really bad thing, mainly because of the points you've just made. I think the right decision isn't always the easy decision. And I think that going forward, looks like a good piece of work, but, you know, refinancing the family silver historically could be a bad move in the future. And we always hear in politics, from parish councils to national and international bodies, the ever-ending argument that everything's short-term view all the time, and that's a bad thing long-term. So I'm going to come to a question, otherwise I'm just rambling. What could the impact of this be on the wider business? So I'm just thinking, say in 30 years' time, the wheel falls off and we need to borrow money. Well, could this become a millstone around our neck? And how can we realistically mitigate against that potential shortfall?
And I just must be clear. This paper does not change the asset life, and we are not moving away from prudence. We're categorically not doing those things. We're changing the approach to debt. In terms of in 30 years' time, so the paper sets out there's a cumulative benefit until 2053, 54. So in 30 years' time-ish, there is still a cumulative benefit to the council.
I believe the question is, what's the negative afterwards? And to be clear, we stated earlier repeatedly we're moving from very prudent to prudent. And that is a drop in prudency. We're not unprudent, we're not being not prudent, we are going from being very prudent to prudent. And I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to say that we're not being prudent, I'm saying that we're being less prudent, but still prudent enough, is what this paper says, and why I would support it going forward.
Yeah, so it's excessively prudent to prudent, and arguably prudent is prudent or not. So we stay on the right side of prudent, and it's a minimum revenue provision. So it's a minimum. We're above that. So in terms of in 30 years' time, so in 30 years' time, we'll have written down a significant portion of this debt. So there wouldn't be a risk as such that we couldn't then take on more debt in the future. And as a reminder, we're taking on debt to finance assets. So the risk in 30 years' time would be we've spent significant sums on our capital programme, and we decide at that point we don't wish to build a new community centre or do some coastal work. A lot of things in our capital programme are building schools, flood and coastal defences, levelling up programmes. So in 30 years' time, we may say actually we can't afford a capital programme, but this change would not be the reason for that.
Thank you. Going back to the question, what was the negative impact of it after that 30 years? Because obviously it's a saving for a certain amount of time, and then it becomes a liability that's additional to the previous. What is that negative? That's what we're trying to ask.
I have that in a working paper. If it's okay, can I circulate that afterwards? But I'll just caveat that with, there's a question about time value of money. So by 2053, 54, you've had a cumulative benefit for all those years. So we've earned interest on that. We've had less cash going out the door. So there's a cumulative benefit achieved. And also £1 million in 2053, 54 is significantly less than £1 million in today's money, as you'll all recognise of how inflation works into what you can get for £100 year on year.
Absolutely. So just to cover, because in the report, you put all the positive numbers, but the negative numbers, presumably you can access. It would be good if we could have those in this meeting, because obviously that's a big part of it. We already presented the positives, which is what's one of the things that made my brain itch a little bit, because we all know those negatives are there, and I think we would like to know what they are. If that's okay. Craig, please do come back.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just quickly coming back. I think the crux of my question is very much covered by your attempt to clarify the point as well. But I think my kind of quick comeback would be that I can completely see and have sympathy with the short-term benefits, because ultimately it's putting money in the bank. So, I understand the short-term benefit, but to my simple mind, there must be a long-term negative, because ultimately, if we extend, I would suggest, if we extend our debt in 30, 35 years' time, on paper, the council will owe more money. And I would suggest that the knock-on effect of that could be things like downgrading of our financial viability. So if we need to borrow money for something that we can't foresee in 30 years' time, and, the bank, if I tried to remortgage and I didn't earn enough money, they'd hit me with a higher interest rate. There must be a knock-on effect. So that's really what I'm getting at. The short-term gain I get, but that's why I say that the right decision isn't always the correct decision, or the easy decision is the correct decision, because we're passing liabilities to people that be sat in here in 30, 35 years' time, and I struggle to accept, with respect, the suggestion that no, everything will be fine, because we just don't know that, and I would like to know if there is that detail.
In Sean's defence, he did say that there is going to be a negative, and it's in the working papers, and that he would find them for us. So he has accepted that actually there is negatives from it at that point. Sean, did you want to comment? Have you found the numbers?
Just quickly, so on the comparison to affordability, we access through what's called the public, typically borrow through the Public Works Loan Body, which is a fixed rate. It's not based on a credit check in the way a mortgage would be done, so we wouldn't be charged more based on our balance sheet, which is part of the challenge that some authorities have had, where they've been able to take on incredibly high levels of debt, and that's gone badly, essentially. But there isn't a increased interest rate in the way that if you had 3 mortgages, you wouldn't get a 4th one. That isn't the case for local authorities. And then to counter the passing the cost down, arguably today's taxpayer would say, well, why am I paying for an asset which is going to be used in 25 years' time? So that passing the buck goes either way, and this is trying to spread the buck so it's evenly picked up across the life.
But to be clear, that only applies to new assets going forward, because you are not going back and checking the lifetime or re-evaluating the lifetime of the current assets. So that's only for the going forward. We are talking about the negative comeback on changing the current debt and annuity. And I think that we need to keep making that point, because we're saying about a positive that doesn't apply to this part. It applies to the future parts, because it's about maintaining and matching up lifetime of the asset and the amount of time we pay it off over. Those should be the same, and that's fair and parity, and that's what we are proposing going forward if we change this 40-year term. Is that correct? That's what I'm understanding.
And yes, but there's a £6 million saving this financial year. So to say there's no benefit now, I'm not quite sure how there's no benefit now when there's a £6 million saving.
Sean makes a good point. The only benefit now is a £6 million financial saving, which is the one thing that the government is saying you're not allowed to do it for as of the 1st of April. And I think that in itself leads me to a very strong conclusion on this. Does anybody else wish to speak on this, or can we move up? So I'll let Aidan come in when there's a question. I've got Louis, I've got David, I've got Ray. So David first, then Ray, then Louis.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I know this is only... Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief observation. So you're saying that the accrued loan borrowing power is what we're talking about today. That's what we're looking at, really. The borrowing potential of the council. Regarding the asset value, Councillor Settle said that as well. I'm Councillor Taylor from Chance St Mary. Councillor Settle mentioned one thing, the hotels. I mentioned another thing, the farms. We own 47 of them. And the fact that the liabilities we've got on is quite extensive. So therefore, sweating the assets and looking at the assets, we have not done that. We have not done that. We do not know what we're dealing with debt. So on that one there, and I make that quite clear because we don't know. We're still doing it now on that one there. So therefore, liability is the key word here, and the future, which is what you're saying, is the fact the future of the taxpayer. Are we liable for the future to be a problem for the future governments or the future people of our county? Because in fact, it looks like liability is going to be with them all the way, and it's going to be a debt. I'm sorry, and I don't, but the borrowing capacity, I see that, fixing the interest rate, going for a certain period of time, 40 years, I get that completely, because that's central government borrowing. That's what they're doing, and April 1st is the cut-off date. But yeah, so it's a very, very difficult, it's a grey area, a dark area, and I'm not comfortable with it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So taking from that agreement that changing it going forward for new stuff makes sense. Changing on the back the idea of after this 30-year point, that negative being a worry. Okay, thank you. Councillor Ray and then oh no, which way round was it? I don't care. O'Leary.
Yes, Chairman, I know there's only advisory committee, but I must express that I have very deep concerns about, number one, the fact that this has been rushed through, and I don't think, we're being rushed through to finish the discussion now. No, it's not your fault because you haven't insisted on this coming forward based on the advice from the auditors. So in my opinion, as elected member, it has been rushed through. I know you can say we've had advice from the auditors, etc., but we have chosen to, as a council, to act on that advice and bring this forward, which I think is rushing through a very serious... Sorry, it's a bit distracting. Sorry. Yeah. I think it's a very concerning thing that we're discussing a very long-term change of policy in effectively a couple of days now. The distance between this coming to scrutiny, us making our views known, and it going to full council on Tuesday is a very short period of time. I am not in favour of it going forward to full council on Tuesday night. I think it's a very, very worrying thing that's been rushed through. And I just certainly hope the cabinet member is back from the beach in long trousers for Tuesday night to answer some questions on it, because I don't think it's fair the officers are answering questions on what I believe is a decision made by a cabinet member or a political decision.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Can I want to ask a point of clarification to you on that, because there wasn't a question as such. Are you saying you don't support it entirely, or are you of the same mind of myself and Taylor that, Councillor David Taylor, that going forward, changing it from next year onwards to match it is fine, but don't change this current one? Is that what you're thinking, or are you complete against?
Chairman, I just don't think that we're discussing this and having looked at this for a longer period of time. We had an email after the beginning of this month to notify us of this. We're discussing it at this meeting, and then it's going to full council on Tuesday, which, like I say, considering we've got to the bottom that this is being done, the major benefit of this is revenue-based, and that is being banned as of April, appears to me just to be being rushed through prior to legislation coming into effect.
I think we have heard good reasons for why that isn't the case, and it's just a coincidence that it's been found and come out at the same time. And this option's always been there. It's just come to light now. It's what we have been told as well. So I'm just taking from that we're looking at drawing together, and we'll come to you, don't worry. There's two different proposals looking at coming together. One which is okay with next year, not this year. The other which is not at all, put it into the normal budget setting process and look at it in more detail to then come through at that point. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chairman. When I came into council, I came here for the benefit of the residents, for no other reason. I have a horrible feeling on this, that the residents are going to lose out. I can't see anything else, because as you kick it further down the road, it's my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, who are going to be having to pay for some of this now. I have a big query as to why we're doing this, and I'm going to ask a very blunt question. Is this to offset something we know is happening, that we need to get some padding from somewhere? Because if it is, that means that our budget is skew-if for the coming year. That worries me tremendously. And I've got to ask a question, and that's, this is taxpayers' money we're playing with, it's not ours. So I wonder what the taxpayers are going to think about us, as Councillor O'Leary has just said, taking on an action where we've been able to discuss it for a few hours, and what will be the repercussions further down the road. And I'm a bit confused as to, our auditors now are Grant Thornton, is that correct? Yep. So they are saying this could be a good idea. Why did our previous auditors not recommend this? They got paid as well. And I'm wondering why they didn't recommend this. And what dealings have SWAP, our internal auditors, had on discussing this? Because I don't see anybody from Grant Thornton or our previous auditors or SWAP present. I am very nervous about the long-term effect on this on our residents, and I'll remind all members, and I'll do it at council on Tuesday, We are here to represent the benefits to our residents, not to just plug a hole in advance. Sorry.
Okay, I'm going to come in very clearly just because I do Jonathan's job for him. We have set a balanced budget. The budget is not going skew-whiff currently. That's not a thing. I'm going to ask Ray something, and I'm going to be very blunt here. Do any answers you get to any of those points change how you feel? Are they going to? Because we've got 7 minutes left to finish off this meeting. I think it's very clear that I think all the members, by looking at facial expressions, are probably in agreement with the current resolution. And I think the current resolution is going to be that currently we are uncomfortable with this decision and suggest that it's looked at as part of the full budget setting process for next year. Is there anyone in here that thinks that an answer to anything Ray said will change, or anyone said will change that view? In which case, rather than going round and round and vehemently agreeing with each other, I will put that forward as a recommendation. Does anyone want to speak against it? You're trying to second it or argue? Seconding it? So, yep, that's fine. So the recommendation is that Scrutiny does not support this decision and requests that it is put off and included as part of the budget setting process for next financial year. All those in favour? So we can say it's unanimous. No, if not, then those against? Those abstaining? 2. Okay. So 4 in favour, 0 against, 2 abstaining. Just because I think having numbers on it. David's not a member of the committee. No. Yeah. And so I think it's important to put numbers on it sometimes because I think it shows how vehement it is. Excellent. So we can move to the next items. We're going to run through this stupidly quickly now, as it is that point. Item 8, the executive arrangements and forward plans. Those are to note. If anybody has any recommendations they want to bring from that to go on to our forward plan, please do say. Craig, do say, yep.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor O'Leary reminded me to mention something, so I'm sorry if you just skip through it. I wanted to suggest to the committee that we bring or we request a report on the status of our Dorset Council's empty housing stock. There's been quite a lot made of it recently, and I know that previous administration did put some policies in place to repurpose. I would like, and I think it'd be a prudent time to bring that forward. I think in the list of our business, there is kind of tenuously, it would normally fit into the possible September meeting without scrolling through. I might suggest if there was space beforehand because it's a fairly important issue and it would probably make sense to hear about it in September anyway, but I'd like to put that forward.
I think before I go to Councillor Louis, that's a great question. I think we could all happily do that. We could probably get it on to the July. So we've got procurement in July, and we could have it on that one as well. And that would then give us a good background for the property strategy and asset management. Yeah, and you look at the empty homes strategy and empty buildings, basically. Jonathan, is there a monitoring issue?
Only that I was going to suggest, Chairman, that perhaps you have a conversation outside with the chair of the other scrutiny committee, because I think you might be trespassing potential, or you might be at the boundary between the two of you. So I suggest that conversation.
Okay, Louis?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. What I was going to suggest is perhaps we could look at a joint scrutiny committee on the item, bearing in mind that the asset side of the buildings come under our remit, but in terms of what houses are used for, in terms of the housing policy, comes under people and health scrutiny. So perhaps there's room for a joint scrutiny committee, given that this is quite a major issue that affects a number of people.
Happy to look at diarising in a joint scrutiny to look at empty homes specifically. However, in the July meeting after procurement, we can do empty buildings because there's a number of empty assets that don't necessarily going to be used for housing. So we will do that in the July to hit the other half of it, whilst working with people on the actual housing side of it. Happy with that? Both happy that's all legal and safe. In that case, the other stuff on the forward plan that we've put on there as ideas is the performance reporting we basically can't do until they have updated the dashboard and created it. They are still working on it, and they are going to give us a bit of an ad hoc update, part paper, part verbal, while they're working on it, and they have got assurances they're doing a lot of good work on forming that new database. We have the Beryl Bikes one coming to our April meeting, which will be interesting. We're looking forward to that. And then we also have the two big ticket items we want to look at over the next year is the budget setting process and how the actual budget is created and checked, because I think not the scrutiny process of it, the actual process of it. I think that could be a really big deep dive. And the other being the procurement process, because there is a lot of rules around procurement, but some of them, if taken too stringently, cost us a lot more money. And so I think there's a bit of a discussion to be had on procurement and what is getting the best value for Dorset. Everybody happy with that as the work programme and feel updated on it? Brilliant. Urgent items, none that I'm aware of. Well, I guess the item we just discussed, but aside from that, none others. Item 11, exempt. We will be receiving an exempt document from Aidan, which was the PwC business report, not plan, that will be coming to us, and that is confidential. Do not share it. It is confidential, we marked so. Otherwise, thank you all so much for what was a much longer meeting than normal, but actually really good scrutiny with good outcomes. See you all on Tuesday at full council.